I woke up to a woman's trembling voice begging me to give her a child. My body was broken, a deep wound in my belly, blood everywhere, lying on a hard wooden bed in some dark mud brick room lit by a single oil lamp. I wasn't supposed to be here. I died back in my old world, hit by a truck while saving a kid on a construction site. But now I was in someone else's body, a dying scout soldier named Yi Gu in the Great Zhou dynasty, shot through the gut with an arrow on the battlefield. The woman kneeling beside my bed was beautiful in a classical way, but her face was pale and full of fear. She told me her name was Qin Wanru. She said the general had sent her and two other women, Su Mainyang and Zhao Linger, to my father as compensation because the army couldn't pay the reward I'd earned with my life. 3 living people, handed over like goods. She told me the deal. One of them had to bear my child, or after I died, all 3 would be forced into military brothels. A child was their only way to survive. So she gave herself to me, even though I was half dead, and every small movement made my wound tear open with agony. I couldn't even lift my arms to stop her. Just as I was about to slip into darkness for good, something changed. A warm energy exploded through my whole body. My wound started closing on its own. I could actually see the torn muscle knitting back together in seconds. The pain vanished. I was alive, more than alive. My eyes could suddenly see every detail in the dark room, every grain in the wood beams, every thread of a spider's web in the corner. My hearing sharpened too, far beyond normal. That's when I heard voices outside. The village chief, a man named Li Ergu, was talking to my father. He was telling my old man to hand over the 3 women to him once I died, promising money and protection in exchange. When my father cursed him out, Li Ergu turned cold and threatened him. Said if he refused, the officials would just drag the women away anyway, and my father would be left with nothing. I sat up slowly. Qin Wanru woke beside me and stared at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I looked down at my belly. Nothing left but a faint red line. I clenched my fist and felt raw, explosive powers surging through me. Take my women? I don't think so. Qin Wanru was still staring at me in shock when I got out of bed like nothing had happened. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped into the yard where the village chief Li Ergu was still harassing my father, trying to convince him to hand over the 3 women once I died. My father was shaking with rage, gripping a wood-cutting knife, but he was too weak from hunger and exhaustion to even stand steady. Li Ergu was mocking him, completely sure of himself. Then I spoke up from behind him. He spun around and nearly jumped out of his skin. He thought I was supposed to be dying. He called it a ghost rising from the dead. My father couldn't believe it either, tears filling his eyes. Li Ergu tried to act tough, puffing out his chest, saying I was just having a final burst of energy before death. I didn't bother arguing. I grabbed a broom from the wall and smacked him across the face so hard he spun like a top. He scrambled away on all 4s, screaming threats as he ran, saying I couldn't protect the women and they'd end up as military prostitutes. Once things calmed down, my father grabbed my arm, crying and asking about my wound. I told him a secret military medicine had worked. He didn't fully believe it, but seeing me standing strong, he let himself relax a little. I understood something clearly now. To survive in this brutal world, I needed to get stronger. And the key to that was the system. I needed more children. That's when the other 2 women showed themselves. Su Mingyang peeked out from behind a curtain, looking me up and down with her flirty peach blossom eyes. Zhao Linger came out from behind a woodpile, clutching a sharpened stick she'd been ready to fight with. All 3 of their fates depended on me now. Then my stomach growled loudly. We hadn't had food for days. The women looked worried. There was nothing to cook. But Zhao Linger grabbed a small wooden bow and some rough arrows from a pile of junk and said she'd go hunt rabbits in the back mountain. Her father had been a hunter and she'd learned from him. I went with her. I wanted to test my new body. The forest felt completely different now. I could hear every tiny sound, wind through leaves, bugs crawling on the ground, a bird grooming its feathers far away. My eyes could see through layers of branches and spot the smallest movements. Zhao Linger knew the woods well. She set a rope trap and searched for wild chickens, but couldn't find anything in the thick brush. Meanwhile, I'd already spotted a fat gray rabbit hiding behind a tree, chewing on roots. I pointed it out, but she couldn't see it. I picked up a stone. Just as the rabbit sensed danger and tried to bolt, I flicked my wrist. The stone flew and hit it dead from 30 steps away. Zhao Linger's jaw dropped. She said it was better than even her father could do. I also knocked down a few pigeons on the way back. My first wife was pregnant now and needed proper nutrition. On the walk home, Zhao Linger chattered excitedly the whole way. I listened quietly, feeling the power flowing through my body, while checking the system panel in my mind. It still read, "Children, 1." 1 was far from enough. When Zhao Linger and I got back to the yard with the rabbit and pigeons, the women couldn't believe their eyes. Qin Wanru stopped cleaning and stared. Su Mingyang leaned against the doorframe, her eyes moving from the game to me. Qin Wanru praised Zhao Linger, but the girl's face went red and she shoved everything into my arms, gushing about how I'd killed the rabbit with a single stone from far away. She said I was better than her father. The other 2 women froze when they heard that. Just this morning, I'd been on death's door. I told them to stop standing around and start cooking. Everyone got to work fast. They boiled water, plucked feathers, cleaned guts. The 3 women working around that beat-up old pot actually made the place feel like a real home. My father sat on a stone stool watching, tears in his cloudy old eyes, muttering over and over that heaven had finally shown mercy. They chopped the pigeon into pieces and threw it in the pot, with some dried mushrooms found in a corner. Soon the smell of rich meat soup started drifting out of our broken-down house and into the neighbors' noses. In a village where nobody sees meat for months, that smell was like a magnet. Next door, my uncle's son Lauer was sharpening a hoe when he caught the scent. His wife Wang, a mean-faced woman with narrow eyes and thin lips, came out asking what smelled so good. When she heard it was from our house, she couldn't believe it. Then their half-grown son Sun Baojin ran in saying he'd seen Zhao Linger and me coming back from the mountain carrying a rabbit and pigeons. Greed took over immediately. They figured I was still badly wounded, my father was old and weak, and the women were helpless. What could we possibly do? Wang slapped her thigh and declared they were coming over. Family shares meat, after all. My uncle grabbed his wood-cutting knife, and the 3 of them marched to our gate. My uncle yelled for my father to open up. I ignored him. I lifted the pot lid. The milky white broth was bubbling and smelled incredible. I ladled the thickest portion into a cracked bowl and handed it to Qin Wanru first. She held the hot bowl with trembling hands. She didn't know yet that she was carrying my child. She just thought I was being kind. The banging got louder. Wang screeched through the door about us being selfish, eating alone, not sharing with family. My father was furious and wanted to confront them, but I held him back. I finished a sip of soup, then walked over and unlatched the gate. There stood the 3 of them. My uncle held his knife in plain sight and forced an ugly smile, saying he'd come to taste the soup. Wang shoved past him, glaring at our pot, then started ranting about how my grandmother had lived with them and we'd had it easy, so we owed them. She had some nerve. My father exploded, pointing at my uncle's face, shouting about how during the family split, they'd taken everything and promised to care for Grandma, but instead starved her until she died. Now they smelled meat and came running. My uncle's face went white, then red. He screamed that Grandma died of illness and it wasn't their fault. Wang shrieked even louder, calling my father names, then ordered her son to go grab a pot's worth of our soup. The kid smirked and tried to push past me. I just stood there looking at him. He got nervous but puffed up his courage since his father had the knife behind him and told me to move. I grabbed the arm he pushed at me and gave it a light twist. He screamed like a slaughtered pig and crumpled to the ground, his arm hanging limp. Wang threw herself at me like a madwoman. I stepped aside and she fell flat on the dirt. My uncle stared at his howling son, then at me. His hand was shaking on the knife handle. He tried to sound fierce, yelling that I'd gone too far hitting my own cousin, and raised the blade at my head. My uncle swung the knife at my head. Everyone in the yard screamed. My father cried out my name. I didn't move. At the last second, I raised my right hand and caught the blade between 2 fingers. The metal snapped clean off the handle and clattered to the ground. I broke a knife with 2 fingers, and they didn't even have a scratch. My uncle looked at the broken blade, then at my hand. His legs gave out. Wang was the first to react. She threw herself on the ground, kowtowing so hard her forehead slammed against the dirt, begging me to forgive them. My uncle dropped to his knees too, sobbing and calling himself worthless. I didn't even look at them. I just picked up the broken blade and glanced toward the yard wall. They got the message. They scrambled up, grabbed their howling son, and ran out of the yard without looking back. Things finally got quiet. Qin Wanru stood by the door, breathing hard, staring at my back. Zhao Linger ran up to me with stars in her eyes, calling me amazing. Su Meinyang was still leaning against the doorframe, but I could tell her look had changed. She wasn't just watching for fun anymore. She was calculating. She'd seen how easily I snapped that blade. She knew this wasn't normal strength. I could tell she'd made up her mind about something. At dinner, the whole family sat around the table drinking meat soup. It was the best meal anyone in this house had eaten in months. My father had 2 bowls, and some color came back to his face. But then he sighed and brought up the hard truth. We only had a few thin acres of farmland, barely enough grain for the year, and now 3 extra mouths to feed. How were we going to survive? Qin Wanru and Zhao Linger lowered their heads, gripping their bowls tighter. Su Meinyang just stared at me with those big eyes of hers. I finished my last sip of soup and told my father not to worry. I'd handle the food situation. All they needed to do was keep the house running and stay healthy. He wanted to argue but looked into my eyes and swallowed his words. He could tell his son was a different person since coming back from the edge of death. Later that night, I lay on my hard wooden bed and checked the system in my mind. A pale blue panel floated in the darkness. Body strength at 15, 3 times a normal person. 1 child, Qin Wanru, pregnant. The reward had been the body enhancement and instant healing. There was a shop feature, but it was still locked. The mission was simple: grow the family, have more children. 1 child had already tripled my strength and saved my life. What would happen with more? In a world where people's lives meant nothing, where even the village chief and my own uncle dared to bully us, only raw power could keep us alive. I needed to get stronger, and the way to do that was to have more children. While I was thinking, the door creaked open. Su Meinyang slipped in carrying a basin of hot water. She'd changed into a half-worn pink silk top that hugged every curve. She set the basin down and offered to help me wash up. Then she told me that the 3 women had talked it over that afternoon. They'd decided to take turns with me, to help carry on the family line. Last night had been Qin Wanru. Zhao Linger was the youngest, so she'd go last. Tonight, Su Meinyang said with a smile, leaning close, it was her turn. I didn't know what to say. They'd actually worked out a schedule. I was technically still supposed to be a man recovering from a near-fatal wound. She saw me hesitating and reached for the ties on her clothes, telling me to just lie back and let her take care of everything. That night, with Su Meinyang, the first attempt didn't work. The system told me the bloodline continuation had failed and to try again. She was already half asleep, completely spent. I asked her if she was in a hurry to sleep. Before she could figure out what I meant, I gave her the answer. By the time I was done, she couldn't move a finger and passed out cold. This time the system chimed differently. Success, a 2nd child conceived. And the reward was something called Divine Skill, 100 Herbs Mastery. Instantly, a flood of knowledge about plants and medicine poured into my brain. Thousands of herbs, how they looked, what they cured, where they grew, how to prepare them. Poisons, antidotes, tonics, even legendary spirit plants from old myths. I could smell the dandelion and bone-mending grass growing by our yard wall without even opening my eyes. In a world with almost no doctors or medicine, this skill was worth more than gold. The next morning, I walked out feeling great. Qin Wanru was at the well drawing water, looking pale and moving slowly. Early signs of pregnancy. I took the bucket from her and told her to rest. Zhao Linger bounced out full of energy, asking if we were going hunting again. I told her today we were gathering herbs instead. Su Meinyang came out too, walking a bit funny and holding her lower back. She blushed when she saw me, but her eyes were bright. She fixed my collar and whispered that she was mine now. I nodded and told her she needed herbal tonics to recover her strength, and so did Qin Wanru. Zhao Linger insisted on coming along to help carry things, so after breakfast the 2 of us headed up the back mountain with an old basket. The forest looked completely different now. Every plant had a name, a use, a story. I pointed things out as we walked. Poisonous red berries under a tree, a fern called dragon scale growing in rock cracks that made excellent wound medicine when dried and ground, planting grass underfoot that could be boiled into tea for clearing heat. Zhao Linger's jaw kept dropping. She'd grown up in these mountains and thought she knew them, but most of what I was telling her she'd never heard of. I told her I'd learned it from a military doctor in the army. That was easier than explaining a magical system in my head. I found plenty of blood-nourishing herbs quickly, astragalus, angelica root, and even a patch of high-quality wild fleece flower root hidden on a cliff face. Any of these would fetch good money at a pharmacy in town. When we'd gathered enough, Zhao Linger wanted to practice throwing stones at birds. She tried copying what I'd done, aiming at a turtle dove on a branch, but missed every single throw. She stomped her feet in frustration. I walked up behind her, reached around her shoulder, and held her throwing hand. I showed her the technique. Power from the waist, steady wrist, release the force at the right moment. She went completely stiff. Her face turned so red it could fry an egg. Her heart was pounding, and she didn't hear a word I said. I guided her arm through the motion, and the turtle dove dropped from the tree. I stepped back and told her it was simple. She just stood there frozen, staring at her own hand like it still had my warmth on it. By the time she snapped out of it and picked up the bird, I'd already knocked down several more pigeons. We headed home loaded with herbs and game. But when we reached the village entrance, I spotted the village chief, Li Ergu, lurking outside my family's gate again, peeking inside. Li Ergu was leaning against our gate when we got back, eyeing the full basket on my back and the bleeding pigeons in Zhao Linger's hands. Jealousy was written all over his greasy face. He started running his mouth again, calling me a dead man walking, saying I was too broken to father children, telling me to hand over the 3 women while he was still being generous. Then his eyes stuck on Zhao Linger, and he licked his lips, saying he liked the young one and that I should be smart about it. I set my basket down without a word and slowly cracked my knuckles. The popping sound made his laugh die in his throat. Yesterday's broom mark on his face must have started aching again, because he stumbled backward, yelling that he was the village chief, and I'd regret touching him. I still didn't speak. I just bent down, picked up a fist-sized rock, and weighed it in my hand. That was all it took. He turned and ran. He got 2 steps before I flicked the stone into his lower back. He screamed, face planted in the dirt, and ate a mouthful of mud. The rock was stuck in the fat of his waist. I told him next time the stone wouldn't just go into his flesh. He crawled away on all 4s and disappeared. Zhao Linger spat after him and called him trash, then looked at me with those shining, admiring eyes again. My father came out worried, asking if I'd fought with Li Ergu again. He was a man who'd spent his whole life avoiding trouble with anyone in authority, and a village chief was authority enough to scare him. I told him to relax. I'd served in the army, fought in battles, earned merit with my life. A village chief was nothing. Even a county magistrate wouldn't dare touch a veteran. It was only half true, but I said it with enough confidence that my father believed it and calmed down. The women came out and saw what we'd brought. I called everyone over and dumped the herbs onto the stone table. They all looked confused at the pile of muddy roots, leaves, and vines. I picked them up one by one and explained. This thick root was astragalus, good for boosting energy and blood. These leg-shaped roots were wild angelica, especially good for women's health. I named every herb and its use like I'd been a medicine man for decades. The women listened in amazement, thinking their man seemed to know everything. Then, from the very bottom of the pile, I carefully pulled out the prize. It was dark brown, shaped like a small human figure, with full roots, giving off a strong, earthy medicinal smell. Wild fleece flower root. A piece this big and this good could sell for at least a dozen taels of silver at a pharmacy in the county town. My father nearly choked. A dozen taels, that was more than a family like ours could save in a lifetime. The 3 women were frozen too, staring at the ugly black root like it was a chest of gold. All the worries about empty rice jars and hungry stomachs suddenly felt solvable. I wrapped it carefully in cloth and tucked it inside my shirt. Then I looked around at the shocked, happy faces of my family and told them, tomorrow, I'm going to the county town to trade these herbs for money and grain. Early the next morning, before the sun was fully up, I got ready to leave for the county town. My father had barely slept. His eyes were sunken and worried. He grabbed my arm and asked me to wait a few more days, saying the road was long and my body had only just recovered. I patted his hand and told him I knew what I was doing. I had the fleece flower root wrapped in rough cloth and tucked safely inside my shirt. I told him Zhao Linger would come with me so I'd have company on the road, and that he should stay home and watch the gate. Zhao Linger's face lit up the second she heard she was coming along. The road to the county was nothing but yellow dirt, full of holes and ruts. We walked for about an hour before I noticed trouble ahead. At a bend in the road, a group of thugs were lounging under a crooked tree, blocking the path. There were 4 of them. Their leader was a rough-looking man with one eye and a nasty knife scar running down his face. The second he saw Zhao Linger, young, fresh-faced, in her short practical outfit, his single eye filled with something ugly. A skinny rat-faced one let out a long whistle and stepped into the middle of the road, grinning. He called her little sister and offered to escort her to the county town. Zhao Linger went white. She ducked behind me and grabbed the back of my shirt with both hands, her fingers shaking. I could feel her pressing against my back, trying to make herself as small as possible. I stopped walking and looked at them calmly. The one-eyed leader stood up, swinging a short wooden club, and sized me up. He saw my rough peasant clothes, figured I was nobody, and told me the deal. Leave the girl with them for some fun, and I could walk away in one piece. I didn't answer. I stepped to the side of the road, grabbed a tree branch about as thick as my forearm, and snapped it off. I bounced it in my hand a couple times, getting the feel of the weight. The 4 of them burst out laughing. One of them slapped his knee and asked if I was seriously planning to fight them with a stick. Called me crazy. The one-eyed man raised his club and charged at me, mid-sentence, not even finishing his threat. His club came down toward my skull. My branch moved faster. It whistled through the air and struck the exact point on his wrist where the bones meet. I heard the crack clearly, his wrist shattered. The club flew out of his grip and he collapsed to his knees, howling, cradling his hand that now bent at a wrong angle. The other 2 hadn't even processed what happened. I stepped forward and whipped the branch left and right. 2 sharp strikes, one to each man's kneecap. They went down simultaneously, faces twisted in agony, rolling in the dirt, clutching their legs. They didn't even manage to scream before they hit the ground. The skinny rat-faced one was the last standing. His legs turned to jelly. A dark stain spread down the front of his pants and a sour stench hit the air. He'd pissed himself. He spun around and bolted. I flicked my wrist and sent the branch flying after him like an arrow. It struck him square between the shoulder blades. He pitched forward face first into the dirt and didn't move. Out cold. For men. A few breaths of time. One tree branch. Zhao Linger was still standing behind where I'd been, her mouth hanging open wide enough to fit a whole egg. She stared at the groaning bodies on the ground, then at me, then back at the bodies. I tossed away the broken stub of the branch, dusted off my hands, and told her to keep up. She snapped out of it and scrambled after me, and I could feel her eyes burning into my back the whole way, pure worship. The county town was bustling and noisy, packed with people, shops, and carts. Zhao Linger's head swiveled in every direction trying to take everything in, but I didn't let her wander. I walked straight to the biggest pharmacy in town, a well-known place called Jishitang, Hall of Saving the World, big name, as it turned out, for a crooked business. Inside, the air was thick with the bitter smell of dried herbs. A clerk with a thin goatee was half asleep on the counter. He cracked one eye open when we walked in, took one look at our dusty peasant clothes, and didn't bother sitting up. He asked in a bored voice whether we were here to see a doctor or buy medicine. I told him I was selling. I placed the cloth-wrapped fleece flower root on the counter and unwrapped it. The clerk glanced at the dark, human-shaped root, and I caught it. A quick flash of greed in his eyes before he buried it. He picked it up carelessly, turned it over, sniffed it, then tossed it back onto the counter like it was garbage. He told me it was just an overgrown wild lump, bad shape, most of the medicinal value already gone. Then he held up one finger, one tail of silver. Take it or leave it. Zhao Linger's face puffed up with anger, and she was about to explode at him, but I put my hand on her shoulder to stop her. I didn't argue about the price. Instead, I turned around and looked at the medicine cabinets lining the walls. I pulled open a drawer and picked up a piece of fritillary. I told the clerk it was fake. The color was dull, the taste bitter instead of sweet. It was cheap ground beetle shell being sold as expensive Sichuan fritillary. Then I pointed to another drawer. Their deer antler had a smooth, flat cut with no honeycomb pattern inside. It was common horse antler being passed off as the real thing. I asked him if this was how a famous pharmacy like Jishitang made its money, cheating customers with counterfeits. The clerk's face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds. He jumped up from the counter, sputtering that I was talking nonsense, threatening to have me thrown out. The commotion brought the owner out from the back, a fat, greasy-faced man who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. The clerk immediately played victim, telling the boss I was some village troublemaker slandering their shop because they wouldn't overpay for a worthless root. The fat owner glared at me and barked an order to have me removed. Before anyone could touch me, a strong voice rang out from the entrance. An older gentleman walked in, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, back straight despite his age, with two servants trailing behind him. The fat owner's expression shifted the moment he recognized the visitor. It was the owner of Renatang, the rival pharmacy right across the street, a man named Qian. Old Qian didn't spare the fat owner a glance. His eyes locked onto the fleece flower root sitting on the counter. He walked over quickly, picked it up with both hands, gently, almost reverently, and began examining it. The more he looked, the brighter his eyes got. His hands started trembling with excitement. He said it was fully human-shaped. The grain pattern was clear and deep, at least 100 years of growth. An absolute treasure, he called it. A true masterpiece of nature. He looked up at me, suddenly very polite, and asked if I was selling. I nodded. He offered 20 taels of silver without a moment's hesitation. 20 taels. The Jishitang owner and his goateed clerk looked like they'd swallowed rotten eggs. 1 tael? That's what they'd tried to steal it for. I told old Qian we had a deal. He sent his servant to fetch the money immediately. A solid 20-tael silver ingot was placed in my hand, heavy and real. I tucked it away, gave a nod of thanks to the old man, and walked out of Jishitang without looking at those two cheats again. With 20 taels burning a hole in my pocket, I went to work. At the grain shop, I bought 2 big sacks of white flour and 1 sack of millet. Real flour, not the gritty stuff mixed with chaff that poor families usually got. At the butcher, I bought 10 full pounds of fatty pork belly, the kind with thick layers of meat and fat that would keep the whole family fed for days. I picked up a large basket of fresh eggs too. When we passed the fabric shop, I stopped. I went inside and chose sturdy, good-quality cloth, enough for a full set of clothes for my father, for Qin Wanru, for Su Meinyang, for Zhao Linger, and for myself. Nothing fancy, but solid and warm. When I handed Zhao Linger her piece, she hugged it to her chest and couldn't stop running her fingers over the fabric, smiling so wide her eyes turned into little crescents. For a girl who'd probably never owned anything new, it meant the world. By then we had far too much to carry. I spent a few dozen copper coins to hire an old farmer with an ox cart. We loaded everything up and headed home. The sun was low in the sky when the cart rumbled into the village. And every single person in the village noticed. Heads popped out of doorways and over fences. They stared at the fat sacks of grain piled on the cart, at the thick slab of pork belly swinging from a hook, at the basket of eggs, at the rolls of new fabric. The cart creaked to a stop right in front of our gate, and I could feel the whole village's eyes drilling into my back, shocked, jealous, and confused about how the dying man's family had suddenly become the richest household on the street. When the ox cart stopped in front of our broken-down gate, it felt like the whole village held its breath. Every pair of eyes was glued to what was on that cart: 2 fat sacks of white flour, a bag of golden millet, a thick slab of pork belly hanging off the side, a basket of neatly stacked eggs, and rolls of fresh indigo blue cotton fabric glowing in the evening light. For a village like ours, where people barely saw meat once a year, it might as well have been a king's treasure. My father was the first one out. He looked at everything on the cart, and his lips trembled, caught between wanting to smile and wanting to cry. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang came out leaning on the doorframe. When Qin Wanru saw the flour, tears rolled down her pale cheeks. No more worrying about the family starving. Su Meinyang puffed out her chest and swept her gaze over all the villagers staring from outside, their faces full of jealousy and greed. She looked satisfied, like she finally believed this man could give them a real future. Zhao Linger had already jumped off the cart, hugging her new fabric with her chin held high. Then the crowd started closing in around our gate. An old woman with white hair and a face wrinkled like tree bark hobbled forward first, tapping her cane on the ground. Zhang Pe, the village's biggest gossip and busybody. She put on a sweet voice, saying how wonderful it was that I'd come into money, reminding me not to forget my roots, that we were all neighbors and family here. Then others chimed in, one after another. Share some meat with us. We watched you grow up. Don't be selfish. We're all village folk. Their greedy faces didn't even try to hide it. My father, honest man that he was, started fumbling and smiling nervously, trying to smooth things over. He could never handle confrontation. I cut him off. I paid the cart driver, then started unloading without a word. I threw a full sack of flour over my shoulder like it weighed nothing and carried it into the yard. Then the heavy slab of pork. I didn't look at a single villager the entire time. My silence, and the casual strength I showed lifting those heavy loads, made the noise die down on its own. They were all remembering my cousin's twisted arm and the stone I'd buried in Liurga's back. Once everything was inside, I finally turned around and faced them. I looked at Zhang Pu and asked her about being neighbors. Then I asked where all these wonderful neighbors were when my grandmother was bedridden and dying at my uncle's house. Did any of them visit her? Did any of them bring her a single bowl of rice porridge? Where were they when Liurgu came to our door trying to steal my women? Did any of these uncles and aunties speak up for us? When my father swallowed his pride and went door to door begging for a handful of grain, did any of them open up? Now that we finally had something, they wanted to talk about being family. I asked them where their shame was. My voice was calm. I wasn't shouting, but every word landed like a whip across their faces. Zhang Pu turned red from her neck to her forehead, gripping her cane, unable to say a single thing back. The whole crowd went dead silent. I turned around, picked up a brand new cleaver I'd bought in town, walked to the gate, and slammed it into the wooden doorframe. The blade buried itself deep in the wood with a sharp crack, the metal still humming from the impact. Every villager jumped back a full step. I told them I was setting new rules for the Sun family, starting today. You want food? Fine. 1 full load of dry firewood gets you 2 bowls of flour. Half a day's labor on our walls or fields gets you a portion of pork. Fair prices, honest trade, bring something to exchange. I pulled the cleaver out of the frame and weighed it in my hand. Anyone who wants something for free, or anyone thinking about trying something clever, they can take it up with this blade first. Dead silence outside the gate. Zhang Pu was the first to crack. She spat on the ground, muttered something about not needing our charity, and hobbled away with her cane. The rest followed in small groups, grumbling sour words under their breath, slinking off with their tails between their legs. The show was over. That night, for the first time ever, the smell of real cooking filled our mud brick house. On the old square table sat a big bowl of braised pork, a plate of scrambled eggs, a pot of steaming meat soup, and a pile of soft white flour buns. My father held his bowl with shaking hands. In his entire life, he'd never had a meal this good. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang ate quietly, eyes rimmed red with emotion. Only Zhao Linger ate without a care in the world, cheeks stuffed full, mumbling between bites that the meat I'd cooked was delicious. After dinner, my father pulled me aside and whispered his worry. I'd offended the entire village today. How were we supposed to live here after this? I looked at his anxious, weathered face and told him the truth. When we were the nice family, everyone walked all over us. Now that we're the family nobody wants to mess with, we'll actually have peace. Better to be feared and alive than liked and dead. He stared at me for a long time, not fully understanding, then let out a long sigh. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I heard the faintest, most hesitant knock at the gate. I got up and went to check. Outside stood Goshing, the poorest, most timid man in the whole village. He was clutching a bundle of firewood almost bigger than himself, tied up tight and neat. When he saw me, he flinched so hard he nearly dropped the whole thing. He stammered in a voice barely louder than a mosquito, saying he'd heard my rules and wanted to trade his firewood for 2 bowls of flour. His wife had been sick for days, and they'd run out of food completely. I looked at him. Then I looked at that bundle of firewood, probably everything he had. I didn't say anything. I went back inside. A moment later, I came out with a small cloth bag and pushed it into his arms. He squeezed it. 5 or 6 pounds of flour at least, way more than what the firewood was worth. His hands were shaking, his eyes wide. He tried to say something. I told him to take it home and make some porridge for his wife. Then I closed the gate. After Goshing disappeared into the night with his flour, I closed the gate and looked around at my family. My father was torn, proud of me, but worried I'd gone too far with the village. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang quietly cleaned up, stealing glances at me. Zhao Linger bounced over with a basin of well water for me to wash my face. I told them all not to worry. I had things under control. Then everyone turned in for the night. Lying in bed, I pulled up the system panel in my mind. My body strength had climbed to 20, 4 times a normal person. 2 children on the way. But the shop was still locked, and the mission still read, grow the family, make it strong. I stared at those words and thought hard. Growing the family wasn't just about having more kids. In this world, a real family needed land, money, workers, and a fortress that nobody would dare touch. Not these crumbling mud shacks we lived in. I think I understood now. To unlock the shop, I had to actually build something. The next morning, barely after dawn, I heard sounds outside the gate. I went out and found Goshing. He'd already stacked his firewood neatly along our wall and was sweeping the yard with a ratty old broom, trying to be useful. When he saw me, he froze and started nervously rubbing his hands, saying he just wanted to help. I told him straight, I didn't need charity labor. His face went white, and he looked like he was about to cry, thinking he'd made me angry. I cut him off. I told him if he worked for me, I'd pay him wages. Real wages. 50 copper coins a day, plus 2 meals. His eyes went huge. In town, backbreaking labor only paid 30 coins a day. He dropped to his knees and tried to kowtow, calling me his savior. I pulled him back up and told him we didn't do that in the Sun family. He was my hired worker, do the job right, and collect the pay. Simple as that. The moment he agreed, the system chimed in my head. It said I'd recruited my first household servant and unlocked the family retainer system. The reward, 1 tael of silver per day, deposited automatically into the system space every midnight for me to withdraw anytime. 1 tael a day, that was 30 taels a month. Just like that, money was no longer a problem. I looked at this skinny, grateful man standing in front of me and realized something. Growing the family had a second path, not just children, but people, followers, workers, building a household. Goshing grabbed a hoe and attacked the abandoned plot behind the house like a man possessed. He didn't stop, didn't complain, just tore into that overgrown ground like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, I gathered everyone in the yard, my father, Qin Wanru, Su Mainyang, Zhao Linger, and laid out the plan. First, tear down the low, crumbling yard wall and rebuild it tall and solid, so thick that no one in this village would even dare peek inside. Second, once Goshing finished turning the soil, we'd plant grain and vegetables for ourselves. Third, and this was the one that made my father's jaw drop, we were tearing down these leaking mud houses. He panicked. Where would we live? I told him we'd build new ones. Not mud brick. Green brick with proper tile roofs. The kind of house only wealthy families lived in. My father's lips trembled. He asked how much that would cost. I told him I'd handle the money. 1 sentence, and that was the end of the discussion. Su Mainyang stared at me with those bright eyes of hers, and I could see she'd made her judgment. This man was worth betting everything on. By evening, Goshing had turned over half the back plot. He was drenched in sweat, but grinning from ear to ear. I counted out 50 copper coins and put them in his hand right there. His fingers shook holding the weight of them. Then I had another thought. Qin Wanru and Su Mainyang were both pregnant now. They shouldn't be doing heavy housework, cooking 3 meals, hauling water, washing clothes. I asked Goshing if his wife could cook. He nodded frantically, saying she was quick and capable. I told him to bring her tomorrow. She'd handle all the meals and laundry for my household. 30 coins a day for her, and both of them would eat at our table from now on. He just stood there staring at me like I'd told him the sky was green. Both of them employed, both getting paid, both eating for free? He couldn't process it. When it finally sank in, his face turned beet red and he bowed over and over, promising she'd be here first thing in the morning. Then he practically sprinted home to tell her the news. Goshing practically flew home that night. He and his sick wife held each other and cried when he told her the news. Back at our place, my father couldn't hold it in any longer. He asked how we could afford 80 coins a day plus meals for 2 people. We didn't have that kind of money. I told him not to worry about the money. That was all I said, and he swallowed the rest of his questions. Qin Wanru and Su Mainyang exchanged a look. They thought it was a lot too, but seeing how calm I was, they settled down. Zhao Linger just watched me with those bright worshipful eyes. In her mind, everything I did was right. That night in bed, I checked the system. The panel confirmed it. 1 tael of silver per day for each household servant. If Goshing's wife joined too, that would be 2 taels daily, 60 taels a month. I was paying them both 80 coins a day total, which came out to barely over 2 taels for the whole month. The profit was enormous. Now I fully understood what the system meant by grow the family. It wasn't just about children. People were part of the family too. Loyal followers counted. I was on the right path. With this steady income, building a Real house was no longer a dream. The next morning, before sunrise, Goshing and his wife Tsuwa were already waiting at our gate. She was thin and sickly looking, with a yellowish face, but her eyes were clear and honest. She bowed deeply to me and my father without saying a word, then went straight to the kitchen and started working. I told Qin Wanru and the others to help her settle in. Then I laid out the plan again and gave everyone their jobs. My father was too old for heavy work, so I told him to mix mud and supervise. Qin Wanru, Su Mainyang, and Zhao Linger would help Goshing move lighter things. Then I stripped off my shirt, showing the hard, sculpted muscles underneath, and got to work myself. The news that I'd hired Goshing and his wife at 80 coins a day spread through the village like wildfire by morning. Under the crooked tree at the village entrance, the idle men gathered to gossip. They said I was crazy. 80 coins was what skilled workers in the county earned. They said I was showing off with no real money behind it. Then someone mentioned I was planning to tear down our mud houses and build green brick ones with proper tile roofs. That set off a storm of laughter. They called me delusional. Zhang Pa hobbled over and screeched that I'd been bewitched by the women, that within 10 days I'd be selling my pants and begging for scraps. Li Ergu and my uncle were in the crowd too, spitting and sneering. Meanwhile, inside our yard, the work was moving fast. Goshing attacked the back field like a machine, turning soil deep and even. Zhao Linger darted around like a happy butterfly, hauling rocks and pulling weeds, her face flushed pink with effort and excitement. But it was me they couldn't stop staring at. Other people build walls by stacking small stones piece by piece. I walked to the foot of the hill, wrapped my arms around a boulder that weighed 200 or 300 pounds, lifted it clean off the ground, and carried it back to the yard. I set it down on the wall foundation with a heavy thud. A passing villager saw me do it, and was so terrified, he dropped his basket and ran. Soon there were several pairs of eyes peeking over our wall, watching me stack those massive stones one after another like I was moving blocks of tofu. Their faces went white. They didn't even dare breathe loudly. They were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't human strength. I was a monster. At noon, Suehua served up a real lunch. Her cooking was plain, but the ingredients made up for it. A big pot of white rice, a plate of sliced pork stir-fried with greens, and a basin of egg drop soup. The smell drifted across half the village. People sitting in front of their own watery porridge cursed under their breath, torn between jealousy and misery. By the end of the day, the entire back plot was turned over and the stone foundation of the new wall was already waist-high. I counted out 80 copper coins in front of everyone and placed them in Goshing's palm. He and Suehua held those heavy coins with trembling hands, eyes red and wet. They thanked me over and over before heading home. But they didn't make it far. At the village entrance, Li Ergu and a few others were waiting for them. He blocked their path, eyeing the coins in Goshing's hand with that ugly half-smile of his. He told Goshing that working for me meant going against the whole village, and to think carefully about that. Then he leaned in close and dropped his voice to a threat. I couldn't protect Goshing forever, and he and his wife still lived in this village. Goshing was clutching his coins and trying to shield his wife, but Li Ergu blocked them like a wall. He reached for Goshing's money, demanding a tribute to the village chief. One of his thugs grabbed at Suehua, calling her little sister with a greasy grin. She screamed. Goshing snapped and threw his skinny arms out to protect her, yelling at them to back off. Li Ergu raised his hand to slap him. His hand never landed. I caught his wrist from the side. I'd followed Goshing and Suehua when I noticed them taking too long to get home. I squeezed just a little. The bone popped out of place. Li Ergu shrieked and dropped to his knees, sweat pouring down his face. The other thugs froze when they saw me. I let go of Li Ergu and turned to the one who'd grabbed at Suehua. He was already on his knees, slamming his forehead into the dirt, begging for mercy. I crouched down in front of him and asked which hand he'd used to touch her. He was shaking so hard, he could barely raise his right hand. I took his wrist and twisted it. The crack echoed through the air. He fainted from the pain without even managing to scream. The remaining 2 thugs wet themselves and scrambled away on all fours. I walked Goshing and Suehua home to their little shack. I didn't look back at the men on the ground. At their door, Goshing's lips trembled for a long time. Then he pulled Suehua down with him, and the two of them knelt toward my back and knocked their heads on the ground 3 times. Back home, I checked the system. It said I'd successfully protected my household followers. Family prestige went up by 10 points. Goshing's loyalty hit 95 out of 100. Suehua's reached 90. 2 servants now, earning me 2 taels of silver every day. I understood something deeper now. Money was the foundation, but loyalty, people's hearts, that was the real fortress. My father was pacing the yard, face twisted with worry. The moment I came out, he whispered urgently, "I'd broken another person's hand, this time more seriously." That was the kind of thing that brought officials to your door. I sat him down and asked him honestly, "Did being quiet and obedient ever make our lives any better?" He couldn't answer. I told him we used to be sheep, and everyone took a bite whenever they felt like it. Now I was going to be the wolf of this village. As for Li Ergu going to the authorities, he wouldn't dare. If he reported me, I'd report every dirty thing he'd done to the county magistrate. We'd see who came out worse. My father looked at me for a long time, and somehow, for the first time, his worry actually faded. After dinner, we talked about the house. I told them I'd go to the county tomorrow to hire the best builders and buy green bricks and timber. We'd start laying the foundation right away. My father hesitated, saying we shouldn't rush something this big. So I reached into my shirt and put a 10-tael silver ingot on the table. It gleamed under the oil lamp. My father and all 3 women stared at it without blinking. Nobody had any more questions after that. The next morning, before dawn, I was getting ready to head to town. Goshing and Suehua were already at our place. She was cooking in the kitchen. He was grabbing tools to keep building the wall. I was just about to step out when someone pounded on the gate. Hard, fast, aggressive knocking. My father's face went pale. I frowned, walked over, and opened the gate. It wasn't anyone from the village. 4 men stood there, dressed in black, swords on their belts, hard, mean faces. Government runners. The one in front held an iron chain in his hand and looked at me sideways. Behind them, grinning from ear to ear, was Li Ergu. His broken wrist was wrapped in cloth and hanging from a sling across his chest. With his good hand, he pointed straight at me. "Officers, that's him. He attacked me for no reason yesterday and broke my hand." The gate swung open and 4 government officers stood there in black uniforms, swords on their hips, looking like storm clouds. The lead officer, a man called Constable Wong, rattled an iron chain in his hand. Behind them, Li Ergu was grinning with his broken wrist in a sling, pointing at me with his good hand, screaming that I was a violent criminal who needed to be locked up. My father's legs nearly gave out. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang grabbed him from both sides, their own faces white as paper. Goshing and Suehua were trembling behind us. Suehua could barely stand. Outside the gate, villagers crowded in to watch, necks craned, faces full of satisfaction. Zhang Pa pushed her way to the front, cackling about divine justice and karma catching up with me. I stepped forward calmly, putting myself between the officers and my family. Constable Wong looked me up and down. He asked if I was Sun Yi, said Li Ergu had accused me of assault, and asked if it was true. I said yes. One word. Everyone froze. My father nearly had a heart attack. Li Ergu was overjoyed, yelling at the officers to chain me up immediately. But before Constable Wong could move, I spoke again. I asked him a simple question. Under the laws of the Great Zhou dynasty, what was the punishment for robbing someone's wages in broad daylight and harassing a married woman? That stopped him cold. I pointed to Goshing and Suehua behind me. I explained clearly, they were my hired workers. Yesterday evening, after I'd paid them their honest wages, Li Ergu and his gang blocked them at the village entrance, tried to steal their 80 coins, and one of his men grabbed at Suehua's clothes. I protected my own people. What crime was in that? I told the constable he was welcome to ask the couple or ask the villagers who'd been watching from a distance. Several people in the crowd flinched and looked away. They'd seen everything. Li Ergu panicked. He stammered that he was just joking around with Goshing. I cut him off. Since when does a joke involve snatching money and pawing at someone's wife? Constable Wong clearly believed me. But he'd taken Li Ergu's bribe to come out here. So he hardened his face and said regardless of the reason, I had no right to take the law into my own hands. He ordered his men to chain me. I raised my hand to stop them. I didn't look at the two officers coming toward me. I looked straight at Constable Wong and mentioned, casually, that I'd visited Renatang Pharmacy in the county just the other day. The name Renatang made him pause. Everyone in the county knew that old Chien, the owner of Renatang, was close to the county magistrate. He'd cured the magistrate's mother's long-term illness. I wasn't threatening. I was just letting Constable Wong know that I had connections. Then I mentioned, just as casually, that old Chien had paid me well for a rare herb. I pulled a small silver ingot from my shirt and weighed it in my palm, letting the morning light bounce off it. Li Erga's eyes went red with jealousy. Constable Wong's breathing got heavier. He'd come all this way for the 500 copper coins Li Ergu had slipped him. That was nothing compared to what I was holding. I told the constable that Li Ergu was village trash, and breaking his hand was doing the community a favor. If the constable still wanted to arrest me, that was fine. I wouldn't resist. Then I held out the silver ingot and said it was a small token for their trouble, team money for the wasted trip. Constable Wong stared at that silver. His throat bobbed. That little ingot was enough for several nights at the best restaurant in the county. Li Ergu shrieked that it was bribery, that it should make my crime worse. Constable Wong spun on him with murder in his eyes and told him to shut his mouth. He snatched the silver from my hand so fast you'd think it might disappear, stuffed it in his shirt, and his whole attitude changed instantly. He announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that after careful consideration, the incident was clearly Li Ergu's fault for starting trouble. My actions were justified self-defense. Case closed. Every villager's jaw hit the ground. Li Ergu stood there like he'd been struck by lightning. Before he could stammer out a protest, Constable Wong marched over and kicked him in the shin. Li Ergu screamed and crumpled. The constable kicked him twice more, calling him a village troublemaker who wasted the government's time, and threatened to throw him in jail if he caused problems again. Li Ergu crawled away without looking back. The whole dramatic arrest turned into a comedy in minutes. Constable Wong straightened his uniform, gave me a respectful salute, and told me that if I ever had trouble in the village, I could come find him at the county office. He was offering friendship now. I thanked him politely. He nodded, gathered his confused-looking men, and left. The yard went completely silent. Every villager stared at me like I was some kind of creature they'd never seen before. Zhang Po's mouth was hanging open, her talk of karma stuck in her throat. When my eyes swept over the crowd, they scattered like startled birds, heads down, not a word from any of them. I closed the gate. My father let out the longest breath of his life. He looked like he'd been pulled out of a river. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang gazed at my back with something beyond words in their eyes. And Zhao Linger launched herself toward me, stars dancing in her eyes, shouting that I was amazing. After the gate closed, my father collapsed onto the ground, gasping like a drowning man. The first thing out of his mouth was about the 10 taels of silver. He couldn't believe I'd just given it away. His face twitched with pain at the thought. I helped him back onto the stone stool and explained it simply. That 10 taels bought us the freedom to build our house in peace, with no one daring to cause trouble again. If I'd been dragged off to jail today, this family would have fallen apart. When he thought about it that way, the money didn't seem so wasted anymore. Zhao Linger didn't care about any of the money talk. She just knew I'd chased off the bad guys. She flew over and latched onto my arm like a little sparrow. I patted her head. Goshing and Sohua were still standing in the corner, shaken to the bone. The way they looked at me had changed. I wasn't just their employer anymore. I was something closer to a protector, someone who could hold up the sky for them. I clapped my hands and told everyone to get back to work. Nobody argued. Goshing swung his hoe harder than ever, and Suehua stood a little taller in the kitchen. The news ripped through the village in no time. Son, you spent 10 taels of silver, bought off the constable, and had the village chief kicked around like a stray dog. The mood in the village flipped completely. Yesterday, it was smugness and schadenfreude. Today it was pure fear. People realized I didn't just have inhuman strength and money. I could handle the government too. Li Ergu had bullied this village for years, and in front of me, he was nothing. The Sun family was untouchable now. Half the people who'd been talking trash yesterday wouldn't even step outside their doors, afraid of running into me. Zhang Pa barricaded herself in her house with a rock against the door and didn't show her face all day. Then, in the afternoon, something I didn't expect happened. Villagers gathered outside our gate again. But this time they weren't there to mock or make demands. They stood hunched over with nervous, flattering smiles, holding offerings, bundles of firewood, baskets of wild greens. Nobody dared knock. Nobody dared raise their voice. They just waited. Goshing found them when he went out to dump water. They told him they wanted to work for me. They'd heard about the house I was building and wanted to help. Hauling, digging, stacking walls, whatever I needed. These were the same people who'd ignored Goshing his whole life. And now they were calling him brother with big fake grins. I walked out. The crowd split apart instantly, making a path for me. Nobody breathed. I looked at every face, one by one. I remembered them all, every expression they'd worn while watching our family struggle. I stopped in front of the loudmouth who'd been egging Lee Urgu on just yesterday. He was bowing so low his back was nearly horizontal, swearing he was strong and willing. I told them yes, I'd take workers. Relief washed over their faces. Then I added a condition that wiped the smiles right off. I pointed at the ground in front of our doorstep and told them, anyone who wanted to work for the Sun family had to show sincerity first. Kneel down and knock your head on our threshold. Dead silence. Every face turned dark red. Grown men, being told to kowtow to a doorstep. That was harder to swallow than a beating. They stood there wrestling with their shame and their hunger. The loudmouth looked at my expressionless face, then thought about 50 coins a day and 2 hot meals with meat. He gritted his teeth. He dropped straight to his knees and slammed his forehead into the ground in front of our gate, yelling that he'd been blind and begging for a chance. Once the first man knelt, the rest followed. One after another, thud after thud, a whole row of villagers on their knees outside my gate. I watched without any change in expression. I didn't help anyone up. I told them the rule. Anyone who'd kowtowed should show up before sunrise tomorrow carrying a full load of good, dry firewood. Then I'd take them on. I turned around, walked back inside, and shut the gate. The next morning, they came. Every man who'd knelt the day before showed up at dawn with a heavy bundle of firewood on his shoulders. I kept my word and took them all, but on different terms than Goshing. They were new, so they'd be on trial for 3 days. 30 coins a day, 1 meal at lunch. If they worked well, after 3 days they'd get the same deal as Goshing. Nobody complained. Having work and money at all felt like a gift to them. For the first time, our little yard was packed with activity. Over a dozen strong men working together, some stacking wall stones, some turning soil. Progress that would have taken us weeks was happening in days. I put Goshing in charge of supervising them all. I pulled him aside before leaving and told him straight. Anyone who slacked off or tried anything funny, throw them out on the spot. Not a single coin paid. He thumped his chest and swore I could count on him. The man was completely loyal now. With everything at home running smoothly, I changed into clean clothes and headed to the county town alone. In the county town, I went to the labor market, a place where people were bought and sold. A scrawny man with a goatee greeted me eagerly, asking what kind of workers I wanted. I told him straight. The village men were useless slackers. I needed people bound by permanent contracts who'd actually work hard. He showed me a backyard full of refugees from a disaster area, thin, hollow-eyed, beaten down. I shook my head. I had enough rough laborers. What I needed was something else. I asked if he had any clean women. He got that knowing grin and led me to a separate room with 3 or 4 young women. They were tidied up and decent looking, but every one of them had that same scared, broken look. That wasn't what I wanted. The mothers of my future children needed to have some spirit in them. He could tell I wasn't impressed, so he lowered his voice and said he had something special, but expensive. He took me to a locked shed out back and opened the door. Inside, sitting on a pile of straw, was a girl around 17 or 18. Her face wasn't stunning, but there was something about it that grew on you. And her eyes. Even though she was frightened, there was a stubborn spark deep down that refused to die. The dealer said she was a scholar's daughter. Family had gone bankrupt, she could read and write, and she was untouched. He wanted 20 taels. After giving 10 to Constable Wong, I didn't have enough on me. I turned and walked out without haggling. The dealer chased after me offering to negotiate, but I just said I'd come back another time. I knew how this game worked. The more eager you looked, the more they'd squeeze you. Better to let him stew for a few days. I picked up 5 pounds of pork and 20 eggs at the market, then headed home. When I got back, the yard was a mess, but not the good kind. The dozen-plus village men I'd hired were lounging around in corners, chewing on grass stems, chatting, tools abandoned. Goshing was pacing with a stick in his hand, face dark with frustration. He'd been yelling himself hoarse trying to get them to work, but the second he turned his back, they stopped. The moment they saw me walk in, they scattered like roaches and grabbed their tools, pretending to be busy. Goshing rushed over, face burning with shame, apologizing for not being able to control them. Only one man was still actually working, quietly mixing mud in a far corner. His name was Sun Dazhuang, a loner from the east end of the village. Honest type, kept to himself. I handed the meat and eggs to Tsuehua, patted Goshing's shoulder, and told him it wasn't his fault. Then I walked up to the group of slackers and said, calmly, that starting tomorrow they didn't need to come back. One loudmouth puffed up and demanded his day's pay. I stepped up to him. He was taller than me, but he backed up a step without realizing it. I asked him how much work he thought he'd actually done, told him to figure it out himself, and then told them all to get out. They cursed under their breath, but didn't dare push it. They left. I walked over to Sun Dazhuang and offered him the full deal, 50 coins a day, 2 meals. His head shot up in disbelief. I didn't explain further. Then I pulled Goshing aside and promoted him. From today, he was the head of the Sun household, in charge of hiring, managing workers, and giving orders. Sun Dazhuang reported to him, and his pay was doubled to 100 coins a day. Goshing started shaking, not from fear, from pure emotion. He dropped to his knees. This time I didn't pull him up. He swore that his life and Tsuehua's belonged to the Sun family, that he'd run this household until there wasn't a single thing out of place. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Later that evening, Qin Wanru knocked on my door and came in with hot water, offering to help me rest. I noticed something and asked her directly. Had her monthly cycle been late? She stiffened, then nodded shyly, saying it was about 10 days overdue. She thought it was just stress. I took her wrist and felt her pulse. Then I told her the truth. She was pregnant. She froze completely. Then the tears came. She covered her mouth, trembling, asking if it was really true, if she was really going to have my child. For her, this baby meant everything. It meant she truly belonged to this family. She threw herself into my arms and cried. I held her and patted her back until she calmed down. Then she wiped her eyes, looked up at me with an odd mix of apology and determination, and said she'd go get Su Meinyang. Before I could respond, she was out the door. Su Meinyang came in shortly after, swaying her hips, those pretty eyes already sparkling. She'd heard the good news and was happy for Qin Wanru. I waved her over and told her to give me her wrist too. She looked confused but sat down and let me check her pulse. I looked up at her and told her it was the same. She blinked. I said it plainly. She was pregnant too. Her hand went straight to her flat belly, eyes wide. She couldn't believe it. She didn't feel sick, didn't feel anything different. I told her it was still too early for symptoms, but give it some time. Her face turned completely red. Shock and joy mixed together, and underneath that flirty surface, I caught a glimpse of something softer, something motherly. I pulled both of them close and told them the new rule. They were precious now. No more housework, no more heavy lifting. Their one job was to rest, eat well, and give the Sun family 2 healthy babies. After they left, glowing with happiness, I checked the system. Goshing's loyalty had hit 100. Tsuehua's too. Sun Dazhuang was at 60, new but promising. 3 household servants now. Goshing earning me 2 taels a day, Tsuehua 2 taels, Sun Dazhuang 1 tael. Total daily income from the system, 5 taels of silver. Every single day, I figured out something important about the system that night. When a servant's loyalty hit the maximum of 100, their daily silver reward doubled. Goshing and Tsuehua had both maxed out, so they went from 1 tael each to 2 taels each. Sun Dazhuang, being new, still earned me 1 tael. That meant 5 taels of silver flowing in every single day. I did the math in my head. The scholar's daughter at the labor market cost 20 taels. For days, and I'd have enough. Then I'd go back and see how tough that goatee dealer wanted to negotiate. The next morning at breakfast, I set down my chopsticks and told my father the news. Both Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang were pregnant. His chopsticks clattered onto the table. His wrinkled old face went blank, then confused. Then his cloudy eyes lit up brighter than I'd ever seen. He shot to his feet and started pacing in circles, repeating over and over that the Sun family had heirs now. Then he sat back down and wiped tears with his rough hands, laughing and crying at the same time. The news blew through the village like a storm. People couldn't believe it. The man who could fight, who had money, who could buy off government officers, now had 2 wives pregnant at the same time. The looks aimed at our little yard shifted again. Fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a deep, burning envy. Liurga heard about it too. He was lying in bed, nursing his broken wrist, when someone told him. He sat bolt upright, refusing to believe it. In his twisted mind, he decided it had to be fake. I was just spreading lies to boost my reputation. A vicious plan formed in his head. He'd expose me in front of the whole village and destroy my name. He scraped together his last few coins, limped over to the home of a local herbalist named Dr. Zhao, a mediocre hack who mostly treated headaches and colds, and dragged the terrified man to our gate. A crowd gathered again. Liurgu stood there with his arm in a sling, eyes wild with sick excitement, shouting to everyone that I was a liar. He said there was no way 2 women got pregnant at the same time, and he'd brought a real doctor to prove it. Behind him, Dr. Zhao clutched his medicine box, pale-faced and shaking. Clearly he'd been forced into this. I opened the gate and walked out with my father, Qin Wanru, and Su Mingyang behind me. I looked at Liurgu quietly until he started squirming. I reminded him that my warning from yesterday apparently hadn't stuck. He puffed up his chest and declared he wasn't here to fight, just to settle things fairly. He challenged me to let Dr. Zhao check the women's pulses. If they weren't pregnant, he said, I was a fraud and my women should be sent off as military prostitutes. My father shook with fury and cursed him. I just said 2 words, fine, go ahead. Everyone froze. Liurgu was thrilled. He thought I was bluffing. But I added a condition. If Dr. Zhao confirmed both pregnancies, Liurgu had to kneel right there and kowtow 3 times to each woman, 6 total, as an apology. In front of the whole village. His face twitched. Kowtowing to 2 women in public? That was worse than death for a man like him. But he was so sure he'd win that he agreed instantly. I brought out a stool for Qin Wanru and rolled up her sleeve myself. Dr. Zhao shuffled forward, placed 3 trembling fingers on her wrist, and closed his eyes. A few heartbeats passed. His expression changed. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He opened his eyes in shock and checked the pulse again. Liurgu was screaming at him to hurry up. The doctor ignored him, glanced at me with something close to awe, then moved to Su Mingyang. He barely needed to touch her wrist before he pulled away. Liurgu was practically hopping up and down, yelling at him to speak. Dr. Zhao took a deep breath, bowed respectfully to me, then turned to the crowd and announced in a loud, clear voice. Both women had the smooth, rolling pulse of pregnancy. Both confirmed. Both carrying children. The crowd erupted. Liurgu stood frozen, mumbling that it was impossible. I walked up to him and told him it was time to keep his promise. His whole body was shaking like a leaf. He looked at my blank face, then at the mocking, disgusted expressions of every villager around him. His knees buckled. He dropped to the ground and, in front of the entire village, knocked his forehead into the dirt 6 times. 3 for Qin Wanru. 3 for Su Mingyang. Each thud hit the ground like a slap across his own face. When he finished, he scrambled away through the crowd like a beaten dog, villagers laughing at his back the whole way. After the gate closed, my father was still fuming about Liurgu, swearing he'd break the man's legs himself next time. Qin Wanru and Su Mingyang stood on either side of him, looking at me like I was the center of their world. Zhao Linger didn't fully understand what the doctor had said. She went over to Qin Wanru and poked her still flat belly with one little finger, asking if there was really a baby in there. Qin Wanru blushed and nodded. Zhao Linger ran to Su Mingyang and did the same thing. Then she spun around, looked straight at me with those big bright eyes, and announced in her clear, loud voice, I want one too. I want to have your baby too. The yard went silent for a beat. Then everyone burst out laughing. My father slapped his thigh so hard he nearly fell off his stool. Su Mingyang pinched Zhao Linger's nose and teased her, saying just asking wasn't enough. She'd have to go, convince me properly. Zhao Linger nodded seriously, clenching her little fists like she was preparing for battle. I ruffled her hair and couldn't help but smile. But the laughter faded into planning. I needed more money, a bigger house, and more strength to protect this growing family. The wall was going up too slowly with just Gosheng and Sun Dazhuang. I needed more hands, fast. Over the next 5 days, things were quiet. Liurgu became the village joke and didn't dare show his face outside. Nobody walked past our gate without keeping their distance. I stayed home, checking on the construction and counting my silver. The system brought in 5 taels a day. After 5 days, I had 25 taels saved up. I'd originally planned to go back and buy that scholar's daughter. But I changed my mind. What I needed right now wasn't a woman who could read. It was workers who could haul and build. The house had to go up first. Everything else could wait. The morning I left for the county, the household was running smoothly. Suehua was cooking breakfast. Goxing and Sun Dazhuang were mixing mud in the yard. Qin Wanru and Su Mainyang had been banned from any work. They sat under the eaves sewing tiny baby clothes, faces glowing. Zhao Linger was watching over them like a little guard. I arrived at the labor market, and the goatee dealer practically tripped over himself running to greet me. He was beaming, saying he'd saved the scholar's daughter just for me. I told him flatly, I didn't want her anymore. His smile froze, and the color drained from his face. The fat sale he'd been counting on just vanished. But he was a businessman. He recovered fast and asked what I did want. I told him, 3 men, honest, strong, good for heavy labor, and 1 maid, clean, able to cook and wash. That was it. He led me to a different yard. From the crowd, he picked out 3 men in their early 30s. They were thin and underfed, but had thick bones and rough hands from years of hard work. Their eyes had that dead, resigned look of people who'd given up on life deciding anything for them. The maid was a girl of 14 or 15, skinny and shy, head down, but her hands were scrubbed spotless. Good enough. I didn't need clever, I needed obedient and hardworking. The price came to 5 taels each, 20 total. I didn't bother haggling. I pulled out 4 5-tael ingots and tossed them over. The dealer's wrinkled face bloomed into the widest grin I'd seen on him. He scrambled to get the 4 permanent contracts. I checked everyone carefully, then tucked them inside my shirt. I told the 4 of them one thing. From now on, I was their master. Follow me, and they'd eat. They knelt together and touched their foreheads to the ground. Before heading home, I took them to the market. For more mouths meant more food. I bought 50 pounds of white flour, 20 pounds of rough rice, and 2 big rolls of fabric, dark blue for the men, a patterned one for the women at home. Too much to carry, so I rented another ox cart at the city gate. Sitting on that cart, rolling slowly toward the village with 4 servants standing behind me, I felt something settle deep in my chest. For the first time since arriving in this world, things felt solid. The foundation of a real family was being built, piece by piece, in my hands. When the cart pulled into the village, women at the entrance nearly dropped their jaws. By the time it stopped at our gate, Goxing and Sun Dazhuang came running out and froze at the sight. I jumped down, pointed at the 4 new people, and told Goxing they were new household members. Get them settled in. Down the road, Li Ergu had hobbled out of his shack to fetch water. He saw me stepping off the cart like a proper lord, giving orders for strangers following behind me with their heads bowed. He just stood there watching, unable to do a thing about it. Back in the yard, Goxing and Sun Dazhuang stood staring at the 4 new people I'd brought home. I could tell their brains were still catching up. Their boss had walked out the door that morning and come back with 4 living, breathing human beings. I called everyone together and gave the 3 men new names. Sun E, Sun Air, Sun San. Simple, clean, a fresh start. They knelt and thanked me in rough, cracked voices. The little maid I named Chuntao. She dropped to her knees too, her voice barely a whisper. I laid down 2 rules. Be loyal and work hard. Anyone who couldn't manage that wouldn't eat under my roof. Then I put Goxing in charge of all the men. Sun E, Sun Air, Sun San, and Sun Dazhuang all answered to him now. He was to track who worked well and who slacked, and report directly to me. Goxing's spine went straight as a board and he barked out a, "Yes, sir." That echoed off the walls. Chuntao I assigned to Suehua, cooking and laundry duty. Suehua grabbed the girl's hand with a warm smile and led her to the kitchen like a big sister. The new men got to work immediately, and the difference was night and day. These were men who'd labored their whole lives. Compared to the lazy village idlers I'd fired, they were 10 times more productive. The wall was going up fast now. News hit the village like a bomb. The Sun family had bought servants. Fighting, making money, dealing with government officers, that was all still within the realm of village life. But buying people? That was landlord territory. Rich man behavior. We'd jumped into a completely different class overnight. Next door, my Uncle Sun Lauer's house was in an uproar. His wife Wang was screaming at him, slapping the table, calling him useless. She'd heard everything. The servants, the brick house, all of it. She pointed out that we were blood relatives, and if my uncle went over and asked for work, we'd have to give it to him. At the very least, he could earn 30 coins a day like those village men had before. She called him a coward. She threatened to go herself if he wouldn't. My uncle finally cracked under her nagging. He put down his pipe, dragged himself out the door, and shuffled over to our gate. He stood outside for a long time before he found the nerve to knock. Goshing opened the door. My uncle forced an ugly smile and asked if my father was home, said he wanted to talk. My father and I both came out. My father's face was cold. These two brothers had been on bad terms for years, and Wang's poisonous mouth had made things worse. My uncle stammered through his pitch. Since we were family, and we needed help building the house, maybe he could lend a hand. It would be more reliable than hiring strangers, he said. My father was about to explode, but I stopped him. I looked at my uncle. The shifty eyes, the fake friendliness, the obvious greed. Wang had pushed him into this, and he was too weak to say no. I told him calmly that Goshing was in charge of all construction and hiring decisions now. If my uncle wanted work, he'd have to ask Goshing. Both my father and my uncle went stiff. Making a blood relative ask permission from a servant? My uncle's face turned purple with humiliation. I acted like I hadn't noticed. I patted Goshing's shoulder and told him my uncle wanted to work. What did he think? Poor Goshing was sweating rivers, stammering that he couldn't possibly make that decision. I smiled, a smile that made my uncle's blood run cold, and told Goshing that if he couldn't handle small decisions like this, how would he manage bigger ones later? Then I walked back inside, leaving them to sort it out. Just the flustered Goshing and my uncle standing in the yard, one too nervous to speak and the other two ashamed to leave. In my room, I checked the system. Goshing and Suehua were still at maximum loyalty, 100 each. Sun Dazhuang had climbed to 70. The four new ones were low, Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun San at 10, Chuntao at 20. They hadn't earned enough trust yet to generate silver. My daily income stayed at 5 taels. That was fine. Loyalty takes time. Then something new appeared on the panel, a golden line of text. My household had reached 7 members out of 10 needed for a milestone, unlocking a new feature, clan registry. It let me see the real-time attitude of any blood relative within 3 generations toward me. I checked my uncle immediately. Sun Lauer, attitude -15, jealousy and greed. Then I looked up his wife Wang. Attitude -40, resentment and greed. Much worse. I focused on her number, and a line of detailed notes appeared beneath it. It read, "This person is currently encouraging her son Sun Baojian to come to your home tomorrow to cause trouble, intending to damage your reputation and force you to submit." I stared at that warning for a long moment. My face didn't change, but now I knew exactly what was coming. The morning mist hadn't cleared yet, but the yard was already humming with activity. Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun San were bare-chested, hauling mud and stacking stones alongside Sun Dazhuang. The wall was going up several times faster than before. Suehua and Chuntao had breakfast going in the kitchen. Everything was running like clockwork. I was standing in the yard admiring the progress when the gate started shaking from heavy pounding. A shrill voice cut through the air from outside. My Aunt Wang, screaming about justice and demanding I come out. I'd been expecting this. The system had warned me last night that she was sending her son to cause trouble today. Not a ripple of surprise in me. I strolled over and opened the gate. There she was, hands on hips, ready for war. Behind her stood her son Sun Baojian, clutching his arm and whimpering in fake agony. My Uncle Sun Lauer trailed behind them, head hanging low. Wang launched into her performance at full volume, making sure every neighbor within earshot could hear. She screamed that I'd broken her son's arm, that a doctor said it would take months to heal, and that my family owed them compensation or she'd never let it go. Baojian played along, moaning and wincing on cue. My father came out looking uncomfortable. Baojian's arm had been twisted by me days ago. That part was true. He started to say something, maybe offer an apology, but I cut him off. I asked Wang calmly, where was her proof? Had a doctor examined the arm in front of me at the time? Baojian was a rough kid. How did anyone know he hadn't hurt himself somewhere else and was now blaming me? Wang shoved her son forward. insisting the whole village knew he was the most well-behaved boy alive. I almost laughed at that one. Villagers were already gathering to watch. I told Wang that making false accusations without evidence could get her beaten with boards at the county court. That scared her enough to soften her approach. She dropped the screaming and pivoted to her real goal: money. She wanted 10 taels of silver to make it go away. I told her she was dreaming. No evidence meant no case. If she took it to the magistrate, she'd walk away empty-handed. Her fire sputtered out. She asked what I'd offer instead. I pretended to think it over, then made my move, the one I'd been planning since the system warned me last night. I told her I'd give them 5 taels out of respect for my uncle. But we had to sign a written agreement so this issue would never come up again. 5 taels. Her eyes practically popped. That was more than she'd honestly expected. She agreed instantly, nodding like a chicken pecking grain. As for the written document, she couldn't read a single character, so she didn't care. I went inside and came back with a sheet of paper, an ink pad, and a 5-tael silver ingot. I handed her the silver. She snatched it and stuffed it into her shirt, grinning ear to ear. Then I laid the paper on the stone block by the gate and told her to press her thumbprint. She jammed her thumb into the ink and stamped without even glancing at the words. She dragged my uncle and Baojian over and made them stamp too. She clapped her hands, declared the deal done, and turned to leave with a victorious smirk aimed at the watching crowd. That's when I spoke up. I asked if she didn't want to hear what she'd just signed. She waved her hand dismissively. Just a receipt. What was there to hear? I told her it wasn't a receipt. Then I unfolded the paper and read it aloud for everyone to hear. The document stated that Sun Lauer, Wang, and Sun Baojian had come to my home with fabricated claims that I'd injured their son, attempting to extort money through fraud. It said that I, out of family kindness, chose not to press charges and instead gifted them 5 taels of silver as a gesture of goodwill. The 3 of them, feeling grateful and ashamed, signed this document as proof. The yard went completely silent. Every villager's eyes went wide. Wang's grin froze on her face like someone had slapped her. She pointed at me, lips trembling, shrieking that I'd tricked her, that the document was fake. I held up the paper and reminded her, black ink on white paper, 3 clear thumbprints, and anyone in the village who could read was welcome to verify that I hadn't changed a single word. Several literate villagers stepped forward, read it, and confirmed everything. Then the whispers started. People calling Wang shameless, calling the whole family disgusting for trying to scam their own nephew. Wang lunged at me, trying to grab the paper. Goshing stepped in front of me like a wall and blocked her. I looked down at her and kept reading. The final section stated that from today forward, the 3 of them had no connection to the Sun family. They would never come to our door again. If they broke this oath, they agreed to forfeit their house and farmland to me, with the entire village as witnesses. Wang collapsed onto the ground, wailing, rolling in the dirt, screaming that I was heartless, that I'd schemed against them. My uncle stood frozen, face burning with shame, wishing the earth would swallow him. Baojian had gone completely pale. My father watched the whole thing. Whatever guilt he might have felt toward his younger brother evaporated on the spot. I folded the document carefully and tucked it into my shirt. I told Wang the agreement was sealed, 3 signatures, full village witness. They should leave now and remember the terms. If they ever showed up at my gate again, I'd take this paper straight to the county magistrate. And at that point, they wouldn't just lose their land. They'd be sitting in a jail cell. Wang's crying stopped mid-breath. In the silence that followed, surrounded by the village's laughter and contempt, she dragged herself to her feet, grabbed my uncle and Baojian, and the 3 of them slunk away without a backward glance. I closed the gate and checked the system. The new servant's loyalty had jumped. Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun San were all up to 30. Chuntao had climbed to 40, and Sun Dazhuang had hit 80. They'd watched me handle that mess, and their respect had grown. Goshing and Suihua were still rock solid at 100 each. The clan registry had updated too. My uncle's attitude had dropped to -60, fear mixed with resentment. Aunt Wang was at -80, pure venom and terror combined. They hated me more than ever, but they were also more afraid of me than they'd ever been. That was fine. Fear would keep them away better than any wall. After I dealt with my aunt, the new servants looked at me differently. They'd watched me handle my own relatives without flinching, no hesitation, no weakness. They figured out fast that as long as they stayed loyal and worked hard, they'd be taken care of. That thought lit a fire under them. Goshen was barking orders with real authority now, his back straighter than I'd ever seen it. Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun San picked up the pace without being told. Before, they worked just to eat. Now they wanted to prove themselves, to earn a permanent place in this household. With everyone pulling together, the results showed immediately. In just one afternoon, the wall that had been at waist height shot up to chest level. The whole yard smelled like fresh earth and honest sweat. At sunset, Sohua and Chuntao laid out dinner. A big pile of white flour buns, a pot of stewed vegetables, scrambled eggs, and a basin of braised pork, rich with oil. I looked at the wall, looked at my workers dripping with sweat but standing tall, and nodded. I called everyone over to eat. Before they touched the food, I pulled out a string of copper coins. The jingling sound froze every person in place. I walked to Goshing first and counted out 150 coins into his hand, bonus pay for managing the crew. His face turned red and his hands shook. He tried to refuse, saying it was too much. I told him to take it and keep working hard. Then I gave Sun Dazhuang and each of the 3 new men 100 coins apiece. I told them the Sun family doesn't shortchange its own people. They stood there stunned. When they'd worked for landlords before, they were lucky to get their basic wages on time. Here, just days in, they were getting bonuses on top of meals and lodging. Sun E was the first to drop to his knees and slam his forehead into the dirt, thanking me. The other 3 followed instantly. I gave Chuntao 50 coins and told her to keep learning from Tsuehua. The girl's face flushed bright pink, and she knelt and kowtowed too. That dinner, every bite tasted better to them. 100 coins was nothing to me, but for people who'd lived in poverty their whole lives, it was a month's worth of comfort. Real, tangible kindness that buys loyalty faster than any speech. Late that night, I checked the system in bed. The bonuses had worked exactly as I'd hoped. Sun Dazhuan's loyalty had jumped to 100, maxed out. His daily silver doubled to 2 taels. The 4 new ones had all crossed the minimum threshold. Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun San were at 60 each, earning 1 tael apiece. Chuntao was at 70, also 1 tael. Total daily income, 10 taels of silver, double what it was yesterday. At this rate, building the brick house, buying land, growing the family, none of it was a fantasy anymore. It was just a matter of time. I was lying there running numbers in my head when I heard whispering and giggling outside my door. 3 female voices, Qin Wanru, Su Meinyang, and Zhao Linger. Su Meinyang was teasing in that sly way of hers. Go on, Linger, he's right inside. Zhao Linger's voice came back small and nervous. But I'm scared. Qin Wanru joined in gently. What's there to be scared of? He won't bite. Didn't you say you wanted a baby? Go ask him. If you miss this chance, who knows when you'll get another one. I lay there listening, half amused, half exasperated. They'd actually taken that silly moment from this morning seriously. Zhao Linger's innocent declaration that she wanted a baby too. I figured they'd giggle for a while and give up. They didn't. After a brief silence, my door creaked open just a sliver. A small figure slipped inside and carefully shut the door behind her. In the moonlight coming through the window, I could see it was Zhao Linger. She'd changed into a clean outfit, and her small hands were twisted together in front of her, fingers knotting and unknotting with nerves. She shuffled toward my bed 1 tiny step at a time. She couldn't look at me. Her voice was barely a breath. Sunday Sundage. I sat up and asked her, half smiling, what she was doing here so late instead of sleeping. She flinched at the question. Her head dropped even lower. Then, like she'd gathered every ounce of courage in her small body, she snapped her head up. Her eyes were shining in the moonlight, completely serious, completely determined, like someone about to jump off a cliff. She told me that Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang had said if she asked me nicely, she could have a baby too. Then she dropped to her knees, beside my bed, tilted her face up at me, and in a voice that was half pleading and half desperate, said it word by word. Please, Sundage. I want a baby too. Zhao Linger knelt there in the moonlight, staring up at me with those clear, trusting eyes. I looked at her and felt caught between laughing and sighing. The silly girl had taken the older women's teasing completely to heart. But my mind shifted quickly. Growing the family was my most important task. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang were already pregnant. Good. But more children meant more strength, more rewards, more security. Zhao Linger was old enough. In this era, girls her age were long married with babies. She'd come to me on her own, with genuine feelings. So I'd give her what she wanted. I asked if she was really sure. She nodded so fast and hard it looked like her head might fall off, swearing she'd do whatever I said. I told her to bolt the door from inside. She hopped up, latched it, then shuffled back to the bed, clutching her shirt hem, unable to meet my eyes. She climbed onto the bed, but stayed as far from me as possible, curled up in the corner like a startled rabbit. I softened my voice, pulled her closer, and warned her it might hurt. She nodded without fully understanding, face burning red, eyes squeezed shut, lashes trembling. She cried out in pain and tears spilled down her cheeks. I was gentler after that. When it was over, she curled up in my arms, still sniffling quietly. I wiped the tears from her face. In the moonlight, I saw the red stain on the sheets. Right on cue, the system chimed. Zhao Linger had successfully conceived. Family prosperity increased by 1. The reward was something called Gynecology Master. A flood of women's medical knowledge poured into my brain. I cursed the system silently. What kind of reward was that? But looking at the girl whimpering in my arms, I let it go. I patted her back gently and told her, matter-of-factly, to stop crying. There was already a baby in her belly. Her sobbing stopped instantly. She lifted her tear-streaked face and asked in a stuffy, hopeful voice if it was really true. I asked her when I'd ever lied to her. Just like that. All the pain and fear drained from her face, replaced by the purest, silliest happiness I'd ever seen. She touched her flat stomach with careful little fingers, whispering to herself that she had a baby now. She giggled, then yawned, and within moments she was fast asleep in my arms, exhausted from a night of fear, nerves, and everything that came after. The next morning, Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang had barely stepped out of their room when Zhao Linger came bursting out of mine, practically bouncing. She puffed out her small chest, patted her belly, and announced with dead seriousness that she was pregnant too. Sundage had said so himself. The baby was right in there. The two older women stared at her for a beat, then burst out laughing. Su Meinyang doubled over, calling Zhao Linger a precious little fool. Qin Wanru flicked her nose, asking through giggles how exactly I'd performed this magic trick overnight. Zhao Linger turned pink, but stood her ground stubbornly, insisting it was real because I'd said so and I never lied. I walked out and told the other two to stop picking on her. They straightened up, though their eyes were still twinkling with mischief. I went to Zhao Linger, patted her head, and told her that now she had a baby, she couldn't run around and jump like before. She needed to be careful. That stopped the laughter cold. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang both froze. If I was confirming it seriously, then maybe it really was true. They looked at each other, stunned. Could I actually tell that fast? Zhao Linger caught their reaction and threw them a triumphant little look that said, "See? Told you so." The news escaped the yard walls by noon. All 3 of the Sun family wives, pregnant at the same time. For farming folk, having lots of children was the greatest blessing imaginable. 3 at once wasn't just good luck. People said heaven itself must be watching over us. At the village well, the gossip women were having a field day. They couldn't believe it, especially the part about Zhao Linger getting pregnant in a single night. Was it even possible? Was I some kind of divine being? Liurga limped by with his bucket and overheard everything. 3 women pregnant, all at once. He thought about his own wife. 2 years of marriage and nothing. The comparison hit him like a punch to the gut. He dropped his bucket on the spot and hobbled away fast, face ashen. The women at the well laughed at his back, making jokes about his uselessness. By the afternoon, the yard wall was finally finished. Tall, thick, and solid, it wrapped around the entire property like a fortress with only a single wooden gate. Standing inside, I could feel the difference. This was our space now, sealed off from the outside world's prying eyes and greedy hands. I stood in the yard looking at the finished wall, but my mind was already moving ahead. I'd originally planned to tear down our mud shacks and build a brick house right here. But I'd changed my thinking. This village was full of gossips and petty trouble, not the right place to raise a family long-term. More importantly, all 3 of my women were pregnant now. The village doctor could barely handle a cold. If something went wrong during a birth, I didn't want to be stuck out here. The best doctors and the best schools were in the county town. I needed to buy a proper compound there. But first things first. My servants needed work, and we needed income from the land. Buying farmland would eat through my savings too fast, so renting made more sense for now. I called Goshing over and told him to ask around the village about who had land available to rent. He took off running like his feet were on fire. Meanwhile, across the village, Li Ergu was having his own breakdown. He'd stormed home after hearing that all 3 of my wives were pregnant and took it out on his wife Lu. He shoved her into a wall and screamed at her for 2 years of marriage without a single child. Called her useless, a waste, compared her to my family. Lu stood there trembling, not daring to talk back. She knew the truth. Li Ergu drank too much and had wrecked his own body, but saying that would only earn her worse beatings. Then Li Ergu's face twisted into something ugly. He remembered that Lu had twin sisters, 16 years old, pretty. He told her to go home to her father and bring them both back for him. If she refused, he'd go take them himself. He slapped her hard enough to split her lip, then stormed out to go drink somewhere. Lu sat alone on the floor, holding her swollen face, crying. She knew he meant every word. Her father was old and sick. He couldn't fight off a thug like Li Ergu. If those 2 girls fell into his hands, their lives would be ruined. She ran through every option in her head and rejected them all. Then one face appeared clearly in her mind. Mine. The only person in this village that Li Ergu was afraid of. The only one who could stop him. And then she thought further. Instead of letting her sisters be destroyed by Li Ergu, what if she sent them to the Sun family? She'd seen how things were at my house. A growing estate, servants, meat at every meal. And she'd never heard of me mistreating a woman. Qin Wanru, Su Mainyang, Zhao Linger. All 3 were glowing, well-fed, healthy. Even as a maid in my household, her sisters would have a life 100 times better than anything Li Ergu could offer. That night, after dark, Lu snuck out. She climbed the crooked tree by our wall, scrambled over, and crept to my door. I opened it and saw a woman with a bruised, swollen face and messy clothes kneeling on the ground. She begged me to save her twin sisters. She told me everything. How Li Ergu had beaten her, how he was demanding her father hand over the girls, how he'd threatened to go take them by force. Then she looked up at me with desperate eyes and asked the question outright. Did I want more wives? Or even maids? Her twin sisters were 16, beautiful, healthy. She'd give them to me in any capacity I'd accept, as concubines, as servants, anything, as long as they were safe and had food to eat and weren't destroyed by that animal. I thought it through quickly. Making Li Ergu's plan fail was satisfying on its own. Beyond that, my 3 pregnant wives needed help around them, and I still needed to grow the family. Twin sisters? That was an unexpected gift. I told Lu to get up. I asked if this was her own idea or her parents'. She swore it was hers, but said her father would agree. Any father would rather see his daughters safe and cared for than hunted by a man like Li Ergu. I nodded. I told her to go home and pretend tonight never happened. If Li Ergu asked about the sisters, she should stall him. Say her family needed a few days to think it over. I handed her a piece of silver and told her to buy medicine for her face. She stood in the yard clutching the cold silver, confused but too intimidated by my tone to argue. Then she slipped back over the wall and disappeared into the night. At first light, I was already dressed and out the door. The yard was alive with work. Sun E and Sun Dazhuang splitting wood. Sun Air and Sun San hauling water without spilling a drop. Goshing rushed over the moment he saw me, reporting that he'd spent all day yesterday trying to find land to rent, but hadn't had much luck. I told him to put that on hold. I had something more important for him. I pulled him close and spoke quietly. I needed him to go to Lu family village right away and ask around about Li Ergu's wife Lu's family. Specifically, her twin sisters. How old, what they looked like, and most importantly, what kind of people they were. Their reputation, their character. I told him to be subtle about it. Don't let anyone know it was the Sun family asking. He thumped his chest and took off running. Taking on new women, especially while all 3 of my wives were pregnant, wasn't something I could do carelessly. I needed women who would fit into the household peacefully and help grow the family, not troublemakers who'd turn the place upside down. Lu's story sounded convincing, but I only trusted what my own people found out. Goshing was back within an hour, sweating but grinning. The twins were named Lu Mei and Lu Lan, just turned 16. The village people all said they were genuinely pretty, quiet-natured like their honest father, hardworking, and decent. The reason they were still unmarried was entirely because of Li Ergu. Several good families had come to propose over the years, but Li Ergu had scared every one of them off. He'd spread the word that as their brother-in-law, he had to approve any marriage, and anyone who ignored him would have him showing up at their door, making trouble every day. One by one, the suitors backed away. Old man Lu had gotten sick with fury over it multiple times, but couldn't do a thing. That confirmed everything. Li Ergu had been planning this for a long time. Sabotage the girls' marriages first, then corner Lu into handing them over. Once it was done, old man Lu would have no choice but to accept it. I told Goshing to go fetch Lu quietly. She arrived looking like she hadn't slept at all, sunken eyes, face still swollen under a layer of soot she'd tried to hide it with. I got straight to the point and asked if what she'd said last night still stood. Her face lit up like sunrise and she nodded frantically. I pulled out 2 tin-tail silver ingots and picked up 2 bolts of fabric from the corner, one soft pink, one pale green. I told her the 20 taels was bride price for her father, and the cloth was for her sisters to make new clothes. Then I told her to take me to her family's home right now. I'd talk to her father myself. She dropped to her knees clutching the silver and fabric, tears streaming, calling me the savior of her entire family. Lu family village was just over the next hill. Their yard was even more run down than ours used to be. Half the fence had collapsed, 3 straw-roofed shacks barely standing. An old man with white hair and a face carved with worry sat by the door weaving grass sandals, coughing between knots. Lu called out to him. He looked up, confused, then saw me standing behind her and the silver and fabric in her arms. He had no idea what was happening. I stepped forward, bowed respectfully, and stated my business plainly. I told him my name was Sun Yi from Sun Family Village, and I'd come to ask for his 2 daughters, Lu Mei and Lu Lan, as concubines. The old man went blank. He stared at me, then at the silver, then at his daughter, mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. 2 girls appeared in the doorway, thin, in patched-up old clothes, hair a little dry and dull, but with delicate features and faces so alike they could be mirror images. They saw the scene in the yard and ducked behind the door, peeking out at me with wide, frightened eyes. Lu started talking fast, pushing the silver toward her father. She told him I was offering 20 taels and new fabric, that her sisters would be safe and well-fed, that they'd never have to fear Li Ergu again. She was practically begging him to say yes. The old man's hands trembled over the silver he didn't dare touch. In his cloudy eyes I could see shock, hope, and the ache of a father sending his daughters to be another man's concubines. But then he looked at the 2 terrified girls behind the door, thought about what Li Ergu would do to them, and the last of his hesitation dissolved. His voice came out rough and cracked. He agreed. His only condition, treat them well. I nodded and told him I'd send a sedan share to pick them up tomorrow. Everything was settled. The moment I stepped back through the gate, my father pulled me into a corner of the yard, away from everyone else. He'd seen Lu leaving with tears on her face, and his worry radar was firing on all cylinders. He looked me up and down like I'd lost my mind. Then he dropped his voice and asked me flat out, was I feeling all right in the head? 3 women at home, all pregnant, and now I was sneaking around with Li Ergu's wife? He asked, with genuine fatherly concern, whether my body could even handle it. His exact words were something like, "Son, can your kidneys take this?" I almost choked trying not to laugh. I told him he had it all wrong, and that my body was fine, strong as a young bull. Then I got serious and told him the real plan. I was going to marry the Lu family's twin sisters. His eyes nearly popped out of his skull. He slapped his hand over his own mouth to keep from shouting, then dragged me even deeper into the corner. He started listing every reason this was insane. Too many mouths, too much money. We should be saving for the house, saving for the grandchildren. Where was all this silver coming from? I calmed him down with the story I'd been using. I'd been gathering rare herbs in the mountains and selling them at the county pharmacy for good money. Some of those plants were worth dozens of taels to the right buyer. He knew I could identify herbs, so he bought it. But then came his real objection. The Lu family was connected to Li Ergu. Bringing anyone related to that man into our house was asking for trouble. That fear, I understood. So I told him everything. How Lu had climbed our wall last night, bruised and desperate. How Li Ergu had been sabotaging the twins' marriage prospects for years, scaring off every suitor so he could eventually take them for himself. how he'd beaten Lu and ordered her to bring the girls to him, threatening to go steal them if she didn't. My father went quiet for a long time. He puffed on his pipe twice, then knocked it against the wall. "That Lee Ergu is an animal," he said. When he looked at me again, the scolding was gone from his eyes. I explained my thinking. First, we'd be saving 2 innocent girls from a monster. Second, we'd be showing Lee Ergu that anything he wanted, I'd take right from under his nose. He'd been eyeing those girls. Fine. I'd marry them both and let him watch with his teeth grinding. My father was silent for a while longer. Then he sighed deeply, clapped me on the shoulder, and said I was doing the right thing. We went back inside together. All 3 of my wives were there, plus the servants, everyone waiting to hear what was going on. I told them straight. Tomorrow, the family was having a wedding. I was taking Lu Mei and Lu Lan as concubines. Dead silence. Su Meinyang frowned first. The Lu family? As in Li Ergu's in-laws? Qin Wanru and Zhao Linger looked confused too. The servants exchanged nervous glances. I raised my hand and told everyone to hear me out. Then I went through the whole story again. Li Ergu's scheme, Lu's plea, the twins trapped with no way out. By the time I finished, the mood had completely shifted. Qin Wanru's face went pale with anger. She held her belly and said those poor girls deserved better. Su Meinyang studied my face with a new kind of admiration. Her man wasn't just tough, he had the courage to step in for strangers and the boldness to take them under his roof with a proper title. That would only raise the Sun family's standing higher. Zhao Linger understood about half of it, but got the gist. I was rescuing 2 good people and adding 2 more sisters to the family. She clapped her hands and said it sounded wonderful. More people meant more fun. My father cleared his throat and put on his head of household voice. He declared the matter settled and started barking orders. Goxing and Sun Dazhuang were to go to town and buy red paper, red candles, and wedding decorations. Sun Yi and Sun Air would sweep the whole yard inside and out. Suehua and Chuntao would start preparing a proper wedding feast for tomorrow. The news hit the village before noon. Red wedding characters were already pasted on our gate, while the mud on our new wall was still damp. The gossip was explosive. Sun Yi was marrying again. 2 more women, twins, and his first 3 wives were all already pregnant. People couldn't decide if I was made of iron or if heaven just liked me better than everyone else. And the fact that I was marrying Li Ergu's sisters-in-law, the very girls he'd been scheming to take, that was the juiciest part. Everyone knew a show was coming. Inside our walls, the mood was pure celebration. Everyone was busy getting ready for tomorrow. I watched it all with quiet satisfaction. The family was growing exactly the way I needed it to. The next morning, our little yard was transformed. Red wedding characters covered the new walls. 3 tables were set up in the center with peanuts, sunflower seeds, and dried fruit, and Suehua and Chuntao were sweating over a makeshift stove where big chunks of pork rolled in boiling broth, filling the air with the kind of smell that makes people's mouths water. My father wore his new clothes and stood at the gate with a grin that wouldn't quit, greeting every person who walked in. And everyone came. Neighbors who'd cursed us, people who'd laughed at us, even the ones who'd refused to lend us a single grain of rice when we were starving. They looked at the tall walls, the bustling servants, the real meat in the pots, and you could see the complicated mix of feelings churning behind their eyes. Envy, jealousy, but mostly something they couldn't fight anymore: respect. When the wedding hour arrived, 2 brand-new red sedan chairs came bouncing down the village road on the shoulders of 4 carriers, with music and firecrackers leading the way. The village had never seen anything like it. That's when Li Ergu showed up uninvited. He squeezed through the crowd in his ragged clothes, eyes darting everywhere, drooling at the smell of the food. He plopped himself down at a table, grabbed a fistful of seeds, and started running his mouth. He made crude jokes about my body not being able to handle so many women, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. Nobody dared respond, but my father's fists were clenched white. The sedan chairs landed at our gate. I stepped out in a red wedding robe. The 2 brides, Lu Mei and Lu Lan, walked in with red veils over their heads, guided by a wedding attendant. Li Ergu's eyes nearly fell out of his skull staring at their figures. He didn't know who they were yet. He started spewing filth, saying he wanted to see what beauties were worth this much money, and actually stood up and reached his dirty hand toward Lu Mei's veil. She flinched and shrank back. I was on him in one step, my hand locked around his wrist, so hard his bones creaked. He yelped and cursed at me. The villagers finally spoke up too, yelling at him to get out, calling him shameless for ruining someone's wedding day. He still didn't know these were his own wife's twin sisters under those veils. I let go of his wrist. I didn't want blood on a wedding day, bad luck. Instead, I gave him two choices, speaking clearly enough for every person in the yard to hear. Option 1. Sit down, shut his mouth, and he could stay for the food. Option 2. Leave right now. He stood there weighing it. His pride told him to fight. His fear told him he'd lose. His stomach told him there was pork. The stomach won. He shot me a hateful glare, slumped back into his seat, and started angrily crunching peanuts without another word. The ceremony went on smoothly after that. I held the red silk ribbon, while Lu Mei and Lu Lan stood on either side. We bowed to heaven and earth, then to my father. The rites were completed, and both brides were escorted to my room. I stayed out to host the guests. The feast ran deep into the evening, wine flowing, plates emptied, laughter filling the yard. By the time the last guest stumbled out and the servants were half drunk themselves, I finally breathed easy. It was done. I stood in the quiet yard doing the math on sleeping arrangements. My father had his room. Qin Wanru, Su Meinyang, Zhao Linger, and Chuntao shared one. The male servants crammed into another. That left just my room, which now held two new brides. So from tonight on, the twins would be sharing my bed every night. I couldn't help the grin that crept across my face. I shook off the wine fog, pushed open my door, and stepped inside. Red candles burned brightly. Lu Mei and Lu Lan sat side by side on the edge of the bed in their crimson wedding dresses, red veils still draped over their heads, trembling slightly. They were terrified. I walked up to the bed where the twins sat frozen with fear. The room smelled of new clothes, red candles, and something delicate, the nervous scent of two young girls who had no idea what was coming. I picked up the dark wooden wedding rod from the table and weighed it in my hand. I could feel how stiff they were, how terrified. So I spoke first, keeping my voice steady. I told them that starting today, this was their home, and nobody would ever hurt them again. Then I gently lifted the veil from Lu Mei's face. She was beautiful, big eyes full of panic, like a startled deer, tears still clinging to her long lashes. I moved to Lu Lan and did the same. An identical face appeared, but the younger sister was even more timid. She had her eyes squeezed shut and wouldn't look at me, her whole body trembling. Looking at them, I felt no desire, just pity. These girls had been living in fear for years, and today was supposed to be the scariest day of all. I told them they'd had a long day and should rest. Then I pulled some bedding into the corner of the room and made myself a spot on the floor. I told them I'd sleep there, and they should take the bed. They both stared at me with wide eyes, completely stunned. They'd braced themselves for the worst and gotten the opposite. I blew out most of the candles, left one dim lamp burning, lay down fully clothed, and fell asleep. On the bed, the two sisters looked at each other, and in that shared glance was the same shock and the first tiny flicker of relief. Meanwhile, Li Ergu had stumbled home drunk and furious after the wedding feast. He'd gotten nothing but humiliation at my table. He crashed through his own door, yelling for his wife to bring him water. The house was dark and empty. No answer. He tripped over something, cracked his head on a table leg, and passed out on the floor. He didn't wake up until late the next morning, head splitting from the hangover. The house was still empty. Lu was nowhere. He cursed and dragged himself to the village well to get water. At the well, the gossip women were buzzing about my wedding. They were gushing about how pretty the twin brides were, how old man Lu got 20 taels in bride price, how lucky those girls were to end up with me instead of being bothered by that animal Li Ergu. Li Ergu's feet stopped dead. Lu family village. Old man Lu. Twins. The words assembled slowly in his hungover brain. He grabbed one of the women by the arm and demanded to know who I'd married. She told him like it was the most obvious thing in the world, his wife's twin sisters. The whole village knew. It hit him like a bolt of lightning. The two girls he'd been scheming to take for 2 years. The ones he thought were already in the bag. Married to me. Sleeping under my roof. Gone forever. A wave of blood rushed to his throat. He staggered backward, mouth open, no sound coming out. The villagers around him burst out laughing. The meat he'd been drooling over had landed on someone else's plate. He let out a howl like a wounded animal, cursed my ancestors, and took off running. Not toward my house, he knew better than that, but toward Lu family village. He was going to tear old man Lu apart. But when he got there, panting and wild-eyed, he found the Lu family yard packed with people. A dozen or more of Lu's relatives stood shoulder to shoulder, gripping hoes, shoulder poles, and clubs, staring him down with murder in their eyes. Old man Lu stood at the front, spine straight for once, holding a piece of paper. Behind him stood Lu, his wife, finally daring to raise her head. The old man's voice rang out stronger than Li Ergu had ever heard it. He said his daughter had suffered 2 years under Li Ergu's roof, and the family had accepted it. But going after his other 2 daughters crossed every line. Li Ergu wasn't human. One of the bigger cousins stepped forward, swinging a hoe casually, and announced that the Lu clan was done with this marriage. It was over. Old man Lu thrust the paper forward. A divorce document. He told Li Ergu to sign it and get out. The Lu family would take their daughter back and raise her themselves. Li Ergu tried to refuse, stammering that Lu was his wife and he wouldn't sign. The big cousin smiled coldly and suggested that Li Ergu's one good leg might want to match his bad one. Several young men closed in around him. Li Ergu was a bully at heart, brave against the weak, gutless against anyone who pushed back. Surrounded by hostile faces and real weapons, his resistance crumbled. With shaking hands, he pressed his thumbprint onto the divorce paper. One of the relatives kicked him in the backside so hard he face-planted in the dirt. He crawled out of Lu family village on all fours, chased by the sound of triumphant laughter. He'd lost the twins. And now he'd lost his wife too. The next morning, Li Ergu was the laughingstock of the entire village. He'd lost the twins and his own wife in the same day. Everyone at the well was buzzing about how Lu's family had forced him to sign a divorce paper, and how it was obviously my doing behind the scenes. Nobody dared say a bad word about the Sun family anymore. Then something unexpected happened. The village elder, a man named Sun Duong, showed up at my gate leading a whole crowd of villagers. My father saw the mob and nearly dropped his axe, thinking it was trouble again. I stepped out. Sun Duong put on his best smile and got to the point. Li Ergu was finished as village chief, and they wanted me to take over. Everyone chimed in, begging me to lead the village, saying I was the only one who could keep order and bring prosperity. My father was behind me, heart pounding but secretly proud. He was about to encourage me to accept. I said 3 words, "I'm not interested." It was like dumping cold water on a bonfire. Everyone went silent. Sun Duong tried to argue, saying the whole village was counting on me. I told him my focus was on my own family, not village squabbles. Then I added that the Sun family would be moving to the county town eventually, so being village chief made no sense. Their eyes went from respect to awe. Moving to the county, in their minds, that was another world entirely. I suggested Sun Dazhuang for the position instead. He was honest, hardworking, and mine. The villagers figured it out quickly. Choosing my man as chief was the same as letting me call the shots without the hassle. They agreed on the spot. I went back inside and checked on the twins. Lu Mei and Lu Lan jumped to their feet like startled rabbits when I opened the door. I pulled up the system panel. Their loyalty was at 10 out of 100, barely anything. They were still afraid of me. No silver contribution at that level. To grow the family income, I needed to win them over. I told them to get ready. We were going up the mountain. They looked confused and scared. Lu Mei gathered enough courage to ask what we'd be doing. I told them, gathering herbs. I grabbed a basket and 2 small digging tools and headed out. The sisters followed in silence, too nervous to ask questions. Under the eaves, Qin Wanru watched us leave with a puzzled look. Su Meinyang, sharper as always, smiled knowingly. She said I was training the new girls, showing them that being with me meant a good life, not just fear. She understood perfectly. Fear alone doesn't build loyalty. You need hope too. The mountain path was rough and the twins stumbled in their new shoes, but I walked steadily ahead. Once we entered the forest, they got even more nervous. Dark shadows, animal sounds, unfamiliar territory. They pressed closer together behind me. I stopped and pointed at a plant with purple flowers near their feet. I told them it was called heartbreak grass, deadly poison, 1 leaf could kill. They went white and scrambled backward. Then I pointed at a fungus growing on a tree trunk, a young Lingji mushroom, good for calming the mind and boosting energy. I carefully harvested it and dropped it in the basket. From there, I kept teaching as we walked. Fleece flower root for hair and kidneys. astragalus for building strength, golden thread lotus for clearing heat from the blood. Every plant I named, I described its use, its value. Some of these, even the village doctor wouldn't recognize. The sisters went from terrified to stunned to genuinely amazed. They'd heard I was strong and ruthless, but nobody had told them I was basically a walking medicine encyclopedia. The fear in their eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, curiosity, and the first seeds of real respect. Then the bushes ahead rustled violently. Lulan screamed and hid behind her sister. Lume grabbed her hand tight. A half-grown wild boar burst out of the undergrowth, tusks bared, looking vicious. The girl's legs gave out. They thought they were dead. I scooped a rock off the ground and whipped it at the boar's skull. It hit dead center. The animal dropped like a sack of bricks, legs twitching twice, then nothing. Done. The twins stared at the dead boar, then at me, standing there like nothing had happened. I walked over, gave the carcass a kick, and said we were lucky. Tonight the family was eating well. I told them to come help me carry it back. They snapped out of their daze and ran over. Looking at that boar, which weighed more than both of them combined, taken down with a single stone, I could see something shift behind their eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something new, genuine admiration. The wild boar was way too heavy for the twins to lift. I found a thick vine, tied its legs together, and swung the whole thing onto my shoulder without even bending my back. The thing weighed a few 100 pounds, and I carried it like a sack of rice. Behind me, I heard Lulan whisper to her sister that I was amazing. Lume nodded hard. I could tell something was shifting in them. They'd expected another nightmare, traded from one monster to another. Liurgu was openly vicious, but the village rumors painted me as unpredictable and ruthless. After 2 days with me, though, they were starting to see the truth. I was quiet and serious, yes, but I'd slept on the floor on our wedding night to respect their fear. I'd crushed Liurgu to protect them. I could kill a boar with a rock and name every herb in the forest. Following a man like that, why would they worry about the future? Back at the yard, I dropped the boar in the center with a heavy thud that made everyone jump. Goshen came running out, and his eyes nearly popped. I told him I'd caught it on the mountain. Clean it up, we're eating pork tonight. The servants swarmed it with knives and boiling water, buzzing with excitement. Chin Wanru came out and wiped my forehead with her handkerchief. I handed her the basket of herbs and told her I'd picked them to make medicinal food for her, Su Meinyang, and Zhao Linger. All 3 of them needed to build their strength during pregnancy. I said this in front of Lu Mei and Lu Lan on purpose. They heard every word, and I saw something warm cross their faces. He went up that mountain for his women's health. He actually cares about the people in this house. When I came back out after changing clothes, the twins were already waiting with a basin of warm water for me to wash. Their voices were still small, but the stiffness and terror from that morning were gone. I checked the system. Lu Mei's loyalty had jumped to 25, Lu Lan's to 30. The timid one was actually warming up faster. Fear alone wouldn't do it. They needed to see both my strength and my kindness. That night, the whole family feasted on braised wild boar, the smell drifting across half the village. Everyone got a heaping bowl of meat and white rice. After dinner, I personally cooked herbal medicine soup for the 3 pregnant women, a special recipe for protecting the babies. The women practically glowed with warmth. Late that night, when I headed to my room planning to set up the floor bed again, the twins came in with hot water. Faces flushed pink, eyes on the ground. They offered to attend to me for the night. I could tell the mountain trip had done its work, but I wasn't going to rush this. I waved them off, told them to rest, and lay down on the floor again, fully dressed. This time, when they looked at me from the bed, the shock was gone. In its place was something softer, confusion, maybe, mixed with genuine emotion. A man who could kill a boar with a stone but chose to sleep on the floor so 2 scared girls could feel safe. The next morning, I packed up the leftover herbs and told the twins we were going to the county town. They'd never been before. They changed into the new clothes I'd bought them, fussed over their hair in the water basin, terrified of embarrassing me. I hired an ox cart so they wouldn't have to walk. They sat on the swaying cart with wide eyes, watching the countryside roll past like it was a whole new world. In the county, everything overwhelmed them. The stone streets, the packed shops, the noise and color. They stuck close behind me like 2 shadows. First stop was Renatang Pharmacy. Old Chin greeted me like a money god walking through his door. After the 100-year fleece flower root I'd sold him last time, he treated me as his favorite supplier. I laid out the herbs I'd gathered, astragalus, lingji, golden thread lotus, all top quality, cleanly processed. He examined everything with growing excitement and offered 15 taels for the lot. Behind me, the twins covered their mouths. Those plain roots and bark from yesterday's mountain walk were worth more than their father earned in a whole year of farming. Another layer of mystery added to the man they'd married. I pocketed the silver and took the girls to the best restaurant in town, Fumin Lu. The waiter almost dismissed us until I tossed him some silver, and suddenly we had the finest window seat upstairs. I ordered a table full of dishes they'd never even heard of: braised pork knuckle, roast chicken, steamed fish, candied lotus root. They sat rigid, afraid to touch anything. I put a big chicken leg in each of their bowls and told them to eat. After the first bite, their eyes lit up like lanterns. After lunch, I took them to the fabric shop and bought each of them 2 more outfits in fine city cotton. At a jewelry stall, I picked out a simple silver hairpin for each. The pins weren't expensive, but the way those girls held them, like they were made of pure gold, told me everything. They'd never owned anything beautiful in their lives. I checked the system. Both at 45 loyalty now. A big jump, but still far from where I needed them. Material things helped, but they weren't enough on their own. On the cart ride home, they clutched their new clothes and pins and kept sneaking glances at me when they thought I wasn't looking. The fear was completely gone. In its place was something warm, dependence, gratitude, and the first stirrings of real feeling. Just before we reached the village, I told them I'd take them back to visit their father tomorrow. The traditional third day returned to the bride's family home. Lu Mei froze. Her eyes went red immediately. They were only concubines, sold for 20 taels. Concubines didn't get the honor of a formal homecoming visit. They'd assumed they might never see their family again. Lu Lan's voice cracked. She squeezed her new silver pin so tight her knuckles went white. I told them simply, concubine or not, they were my women now. Whatever customs applied, I'd follow them properly. They deserved that. The next morning, I kept my word. I had Qin Wanru help prepare generous homecoming gifts: 2 slabs of good pork belly, 20 eggs, a bag of white flour, a jug of fine wine, and 2 bolts of new cloth I'd bought in the county for old man Lu. The twins watched the pile of gifts grow, and I could see the emotion building in their eyes. I hired an ox cart again and loaded everything up. When we rolled into Lu family village, every neighbor came out to gawk. They saw me sitting on the cart with the twin sisters, surrounded by more food than most of them saw in a month. The whispers were all envy. Old man Lu had really married up. Lu and her father were waiting at the door. The old man was so flustered he didn't know what to do with his hands. Lu grabbed her sisters and couldn't hold back tears. I set the gifts down, exchanged a few polite words with the old man, then excused myself to the yard so the 3 sisters could have time alone. Inside, Lu pulled the twins close and interrogated them. Had he mistreated them? Had he hurt them? The girls tumbled over each other to reassure her. Lu Lan blurted out that I was wonderful, kind, thoughtful. Lu Mei told her about the wedding night, how I'd made a bed on the floor and let them have the whole bed to themselves because I could see they were scared. Lu went quiet. Then her expression hardened. She poked each sister in the forehead and called them fools. She sat them down and got serious. Sleeping on the floor was sweet, she said, but it also meant they weren't doing their job. They were concubines in a household with 3 other women, all pregnant. Right now they had the advantage of being new, being young, being fresh. But that wouldn't last. If they wanted real security in the Sun family, if they wanted standing and respect that couldn't be taken away, they needed one thing: children. As fast as possible. Preferably sons. She told them that men's hearts followed whoever gave them heirs. Youth was their biggest asset and they couldn't waste it being shy and passive. Her words hit them like cold water. The dreamy smiles faded. They went quiet, thinking hard. Then, slowly, their cheeks turned red again. Not from embarrassment this time, but from a new, determined resolve. On the ride home, the atmosphere on the cart had completely changed. The twins sat in silence, heads down, lost in thought. I didn't ask what their sister had told them. I could guess. And honestly, it was exactly what I needed. I didn't want 2 frightened dolls who just obeyed. I wanted women who understood their role in this family and actively worked toward it. Lou had done me a favor. I checked the system. Both sisters had hit 50 loyalty. Daily income had risen to 12 taels. Good progress. That night, when I pushed open my bedroom door, I stopped short. Everything was different. The floor bed was gone. The Kong was made up with fresh bedding and extra thick padding, looking warm and inviting. The Dragon and Phoenix wedding candles had been relit, painting the room red. The air smelled of clean, freshly washed skin. Lu Mei and Lu Lan sat side by side on the edge of the Kong in their new cotton clothes from the county. Their hair was still damp from washing. Their hands were twisting their shirt hems nervously. When they saw me, they both stood up at once, trembling slightly. Lu Mei spoke first. Then they both dropped to their knees together and said they wanted to attend to me tonight. I set down my cup, bent down, and pulled them both to their feet. I told them the floor was cold. Then I asked if they were sure. They nodded, faces burning red. Lu Lan unable to even speak, but nodding with fierce determination. I stroked their hair gently, blew out the table candles, and left only the wedding candles flickering on the Kong. I took off my outer clothes and got into bed. They undressed clumsily, faces scarlet, and slipped under the covers on either side of me. Under the blanket, both their bodies were trembling against mine. I didn't rush anything. I just pulled them both into my arms and held them close. The night was long. By the time the candles burned out and dawn was breaking, both sisters were fast asleep in my arms, faces flushed, exhausted but peaceful. I was wide awake, staring at the system panel. 2 notifications. Both failures. Bloodline continuation failed. No offspring conceived. Bloodline continuation failed. No offspring conceived. Both of them. Neither had worked. I frowned. This had never happened before. With Qin Wanru, Su Meinyang, Zhao Linger, every single time had been a first-try success. What was different about the twins? A whole night of effort, and every single attempt failed. The system kept giving me the same cold message. Bloodline continuation unsuccessful. No offspring conceived. I lay there staring at the ceiling, genuinely confused. This had never happened before. I looked at the twins sleeping peacefully beside me, their faces still flushed, lashes casting shadows in the early light. Was the problem me? I pulled up my system panel immediately. Everything looked normal. Body strength at 15, 3 times a normal man. 3 children already on the way, skills intact. Nothing wrong on my end. I looked at the sisters again. They were thin, fragile-looking. But still, I decided to try again. I wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. I pulled Lu Mei close. She woke up drowsy, blushing the moment she saw me. I kept it brief. One more time. When she collapsed back into sleep afterward, the system chimed again. Failed. I turned to Lu Lan. The poor girl had barely gotten any rest, and she was the timid one. When she finally passed out again, I got the same cursed notification. Failed. I swore under my breath. What was going on? Looking at the 2 of them sprawled across the bed like exhausted kittens, my frustration faded into something softer. These girls had grown up half-starved, never eating a proper meal in their lives. They'd lived for years under the shadow of Li Ergu's threats, constantly afraid. Their bodies were drained. Years of poor nutrition and chronic stress had taken a real toll. Then it hit me. I had the gynecology master skill. Why hadn't I thought of that sooner? I let the girls sleep and quietly got dressed. Outside, the yard was already alive with morning activity. The 3 pregnant women were sitting under the eaves in the sunshine, chatting happily. When Su Meinyang saw me come out of the bedroom, she shot me a teasing look and asked if I'd had a tiring night. Qin Wanru and Zhao Linger giggled behind their hands. I coughed, said nothing, and went straight to the well to splash cold water on my face. At breakfast, the twins finally emerged, holding their lower backs, walking stiffly, faces red as ripe apples. They couldn't look anyone in the eye. The other women, all veterans of the same experience, took one look and burst out laughing. Su Meinyang couldn't resist pointing out that the new sisters seemed to have forgotten how to walk. The twins looked ready to melt into the floor. I shot Su Meinyang a look and told everyone to stop teasing and just eat. I served both girls a big bowl of meat porridge myself. After breakfast, I brought them back to the room privately. They stood there nervous and stiff, probably expecting more of last night. I told them to sit on the Kong and give me their wrists. I activated the gynecology master skill and felt Lu Mei's pulse first. The diagnosis came instantly, Her pulse was thin, weak, and slow. Cold limbs, pale complexion, irregular periods with clotting. Severe uterine coldness, built up over years. With a condition like that, getting pregnant was nearly impossible. Her body couldn't even manage normal monthly cycles properly. Lulan's pulse told the same story, maybe worse. Her long-term anxiety and fear had knotted up her energy and blood flow on top of the same cold womb problem. I exhaled with relief. At least the problem wasn't me. I looked at these two scared 16-year-old girls and felt a deep wave of pity. At their age, they should have been blooming. Instead, years of hunger and terror had hollowed them out. Lu Mei noticed my serious expression and asked timidly if something was wrong with them. I softened my voice and told them it wasn't anything serious. Their bodies were just weak and too cold inside. They needed to be nursed back to health. I explained it in simple terms. Their bodies were like poor, frozen soil. You had to warm the earth first, add nutrients, make it rich and fertile. Only then could you plant seeds and expect them to grow. They understood the metaphor perfectly. Their faces went bright red. They realized the failure to conceive was because of their health, and guilt flooded their eyes. They apologized, calling themselves useless. I ruffled both their heads and told them to stop talking nonsense. It wasn't their fault. I just hadn't noticed the problem sooner. This condition was treatable. I'd prepare medicine for them, and after some time on it, their bodies would recover completely. Getting pregnant after that would be easy. My confidence calmed them down completely. Their guilt evaporated. I could see it in their eyes. This man was not only powerful and generous, he even understood women's medicine. They felt lucky to be here. The system confirmed the progress. Lu Mei's loyalty rose to 55, Lulan's to 60. Real connection was building. I sent them outside to rest and went to the little herb shed Goshing had built for me. From my mountain-gathered supplies, I selected the right combination: angelica root, Sichuan lovage, white peony, prepared Rehmannia, all warming, blood-nourishing, cold-dispelling herbs. Using the exact formula the gynecology master skill gave me, I prepared 2 custom prescriptions. I handed them to Tsuhua with careful instructions on how to brew them, the right water level, the right heat, the right timing. Standing in the yard afterward, watching the servants working, the women doing needlework under the eaves, everything humming along, I felt a deep, solid sense of satisfaction. This family was growing stronger every day. 5 women now: Qin Wanru, Su Meinyang, Zhao Linger, Lu Mei, Lulan. 3 pregnant, 2 being treated. My own situation was handled, but then a thought crossed my mind. What about my father? At dinner that evening, the whole family gathered around a big table in the yard. Braised wild boar, chicken stewed with mushrooms, steamed fish, fresh vegetables. A feast that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. My 5 women sat beside me. The servants had their own table with plenty of food and wine. My father looked around at this big, bustling household and couldn't stop smiling. After a few rounds of drinks, I brought up something I'd been thinking about. I told my father that our family was growing. Life was good now, and maybe it was time he found himself a companion. Someone to keep him company in his old age. He sprayed his wine across the table. Everyone froze and stared at me. A son finding his father a wife. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing. His face went crimson. He sputtered and called me a brat, saying I was talking nonsense. But I stayed serious. I told him I remembered everything he'd done, raising me alone after my mother died young, turning down matchmakers because he was afraid a new wife would treat me badly. But things were different now. I was grown, the family was strong, and it was his turn to think about himself. His anger faded. He went quiet, drained his cup in one gulp, and his eyes turned red and wet. He'd thought about it over the years, of course. But back then, who would marry a poor man with a half-grown son? All the women at the table felt it. Qin Wanru and Su Meinyang exchanged a look of quiet admiration. Even the twins lowered their heads with deepened respect. My father grumbled that he was too old, that people would laugh. I told him he was still healthy and had decades left. Then, to lighten the mood, I grinned and jokingly suggested Chuntao. She was hard-working and honest. Maybe she'd do? He exploded. He ripped the shoe off his foot and came at my head with it, chasing me around the yard, roaring that Chuntao was young enough to be my sister and how dare I make fun of him. The whole yard erupted in laughter. The women, the servants, everyone. Poor Chuntao heard her name, went white, then scarlet, and buried her face in her rice bowl. After he ran out of breath, I sat him back down, rubbed his back, and told him I was only joking about Chuntao. But finding a real companion, someone his age, warm and caring, that was serious. He grunted but didn't refuse anymore. The ice was cracking. The next day, I quietly pulled Goshing aside and gave him a secret mission. Scout the neighboring villages for widows around 40 or 50, good character, clean background, willing to remarry. I told him to keep it absolutely quiet. My father's pride couldn't take public gossip about this. Goshing's eyes lit up and he swore he'd find the best one, then sprinted off like a man on a holy quest. Meanwhile, the twins were faithfully drinking the herbal medicine I'd prepared. The dark, bitter soup made them scrunch their faces, but they swallowed every drop. I checked their pulses daily. The medicine was already working. The deep cold trapped in their bodies was slowly being dissolved by the warm, nourishing herbs. The gynecology master skill was proving its worth. Given time, getting them pregnant would just be a matter of patience. The next few days passed peacefully. The servants, led by Sun Dazhuang as the new village chief, built the walls higher and thicker. The back plot was fully planted with seasonal vegetables. The 3 pregnant women relaxed under the eaves, sewing baby clothes and chatting. Lu Mei and Lu Lan grew healthier by the day, color returning to their cheeks. Their feelings toward me had shifted completely, from fear to respect to genuine affection. Their eyes followed me whenever I was in the yard. Then Goshing came running through the gate, face tight with worry. "Something's wrong," he gasped. "Tax collectors are here." I told him to slow down and explain. This year, the imperial court had raised taxes. Every household in the village owed 30% more grain than usual. The tax officer had brought armed government runners and was going door to door. Anyone who couldn't pay got beaten, their house sealed. I asked how much we owed. Because of our large household, we were assessed 5 shur of grain. The tax officer was offering to accept silver instead, 2 taels per shur. 10 taels total. Goshing was panicking. 10 taels was robbery. On the open market, a shur of rice cost barely over 1 tael. This official was charging double, pocketing the difference. Several families had already been beaten for failing to pay. My eyes went cold. This was how it always started, governments squeezing people until they had nothing left. I asked where the tax collector was now. Before Goshing even finished talking, a shrill voice started screaming outside our gate. "Sun family, get out here and pay your taxes." A man with a voice like a strangled duck kicked our gate open and strutted in with 4 or 5 armed runners carrying heavy wooden clubs. He waved a ledger in the air and demanded 10 taels of silver or 5 shur of grain, telling us not to waste his precious time. His name was Zhang San. His beady eyes swept the yard, took in my strong servants, the women sitting under the eaves, and I could practically see the greed growing behind his face. He'd heard the rumors about our family's sudden wealth and came to squeeze us dry. I stepped forward and blocked him from my family. I asked him since when the tax rate was this high. I knew the actual rate, 1 shur of grain per household, or about 1 tael of silver. Not 10. He lost it. His voice shot up an octave. He screamed that I was nobody, that I had no right to question imperial orders. He claimed the border wars had gotten worse and the emperor had ordered a 30% increase, backed by the county magistrate's official documents. As for the exchange rate of 2 taels per shur, that was his generous favor to us peasants who couldn't produce enough grain. Pay up or go to jail. His runners crowded forward, slamming their clubs on the ground, faces full of menace. My father grabbed my sleeve with shaking hands, begging me to just pay and not fight the government. The women huddled together, terrified. Lu Mei and Lu Lan were trembling. This scene reminded them of being bullied by Li Ergu. I stood perfectly still. I knew this was all lies. I'd come back from the border myself. The war was already over. There was no emergency. These officials were simply stealing from villagers using fake orders. I asked Zhang San calmly whether we had any choice in the matter. He sneered and said his word was law. Then he ordered his men to search our house. He wanted to see what treasures we were hiding behind our tall walls. One runner reached out to shove me aside. Goshing burst out from behind me, gripping a wooden pole, and planted himself between me and the runners. He shouted that they were crooked dogs with no right to take money that my family had earned honestly. Sun E, Sun Air, and Sun Sin stepped out from the corners too, holding shovels and hoes. saying nothing but making their position clear. Every person in the Sun household stood together in that moment. Zhang Sen laughed at Goxing, a servant daring to challenge the government. He screamed at his runners to beat Goxing to death, and he'd take responsibility. The runners raised their clubs and swung at Goxing's head. My father cried out. The women closed their eyes. They heard the thuds and the cracking of bones. When they opened their eyes, Goxing was standing exactly where he'd been, untouched. The runners were on the ground, sprawled in every direction, clutching broken arms and shattered legs, howling in agony. I'd moved so fast nobody had seen it clearly. Zhang San's face went blank with shock. He stared at his men writhing on the ground, then at me standing there without a scratch or a change in expression. He started shrieking about how attacking government officials was a capital crime punishable by execution of the entire family. He was backing away as he screamed. I walked toward him slowly. I grabbed his throat with one hand and lifted him off the ground like a chicken. His legs kicked wildly in the air, his face turning purple from lack of oxygen. I asked him if he'd just said his word was law. He couldn't answer. He was choking. I told him that on Sun family ground, my word was law. I squeezed. There was a small, sharp crack. I'd crushed his throat bone. I dropped him. He collapsed like a wet rag, clutching his neck, coughing violently but unable to make any real sound. Even if he survived, he'd never speak again. I looked down at him, then at the moaning runners scattered across my yard. One of them, while being dragged up by the others, managed to spit out a threat that they'd go straight to the county office and have the magistrate's people come back, with soldiers to flatten our entire village. They propped up the silent, broken Zhang Sen between them and scrambled out of our yard, falling over each other in their rush to escape. News of what I'd done spread through the village within the hour. I'd beaten tax collectors, crushed a government official's throat, broken several runners' legs. The village was gripped by panic. People huddled together, whispering about how I'd gone too far, how the county magistrate would punish the whole village for my actions. Some of the looks aimed at our walls had shifted from envy to resentment. They were afraid my fight would drag them down too. Inside our yard, my father chain-smoked his pipe, forehead knotted with worry. He asked if I'd been too rash. In his world, ordinary people never fought the government. That was a law of nature. The women surrounded me with anxious faces. Qin Wanru said gently that those were imperial officials, and they wouldn't let this go. Su Mingyang, serious for once, warned about hidden retaliation from the county office. I knew my reaction had been rough. But with people like Zhang San, giving an inch meant losing a mile. If I'd handed over 10 taels today, tomorrow they'd come for 100. The only way to buy time was to hurt them so badly they'd think twice before coming back. I told everyone to stay calm. I had a plan. First, I sent Goxing to the county town with 2 tasks. 1. Go to Old Qian at Renatang and dig up everything about Zhang San. Who backed him, who he was connected to, what his weaknesses were. 2. Buy me a specific list of herbs. Those herbs were harmless individually, but combined in the right proportions according to my 100 herbs mastery, they formed a slow-acting poison that would gradually destroy a person's body without anyone suspecting foul play. I wasn't going to kill Zhang San outright. That would be too obvious. I'd make him rot from the inside, slowly and painfully. That was the proper punishment for his kind. Goxing took off without hesitation. I knew this wasn't over. A petty tax collector in a remote village wouldn't dare charge double the real rate on his own. Someone bigger was pulling the strings. I didn't want trouble, but trouble had found me, and I'd face it head on. That afternoon, I gathered Sun Yi, Sun Air, and Sun San in the yard and stopped all other work. I told them they had some muscle but no real fighting skill. If they faced trained opponents, they'd crumble. So I taught them military combat techniques, the same drills soldiers used in the army. I demonstrated the first move, a lunging punch from a low horse stance. My fist split the air with a sharp crack. Their eyes went wide. They could feel the terrifying power behind it, even without understanding martial arts. Every trace of distraction vanished. They threw themselves into learning with complete focus. The yard filled with shouts and the thud of fists. The women watched from under the eaves. Seeing me move through those powerful, fluid forms, their worries slowly melted away. With a man like me standing between them and the world, even the sky falling wouldn't be a problem. Before dawn the next day, Goxing came racing back from the county, covered in road dust. He'd gotten everything. Old Qian had been forthcoming. Zhang San was nothing but a local thug who'd landed the tax collector job through his brother-in-law, a man named Advisor Chun, the county magistrate's personal strategist. Chun was the real power. He handled documents, gave counsel, and wielded enormous influence in the county office. He was also greedy, corrupt, and vengeful. Plenty of merchants in town had been squeezed by him, but nobody dared speak up. As for the county magistrate himself, a man named Zhou Wenhai, Old Qian said he was actually fairly honest. His one weakness was an obsession with Taoist longevity practices. He was constantly searching for rare medicines and elixirs that might extend his life. In fact, he'd privately offered 100 taels of silver for a legendary herb called 7 Stars Moon Grass, but nobody had been able to find it. 7 Stars Moon Grass. That name caught my attention. Goshing also handed me the herbs I'd requested. Old Qian had picked the finest quality for me personally. There was one more message from Old Qian. He warned me that Advisor Chun was famously petty and vindictive. He would not let this go. I should be extremely careful. But if I ever needed information or early warnings, I could come to Renatang anytime. I thanked Goshing, sent him to the kitchen for food and rest, then took the herbs to my room. Using the formula from my 100 herbs mastery, I ground each one into fine powder, measured exact proportions, and mixed them together. I poured the finished compound into a bamboo tube and sealed it. I didn't need it yet, but when the time came, it would be ready. Back in the county, Advisor Chin smashed his teacup when he heard what I'd done to his brother-in-law Zhang San. A crushed throat, the man would never speak again. Chin took it as a personal insult. He started gathering men to come arrest me, planning to throw me in the county dungeon and make me suffer until I begged for death. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to make his move. I remembered what Goshing had told me. The county magistrate, Zhou Wenhai, was obsessed with Taoist longevity and had been desperately searching for a legendary herb called 7 Stars Moon Grass, even offering 100 taels for it. The moment I heard that name, my 100 herbs mastery had kicked in. I knew exactly what it was. 7 leaves arranged like an open palm around a small silver-white flower that glowed faintly at night. It didn't actually extend your life. Its real power was as a universal antidote, capable of neutralizing virtually any poison. And I knew where to find one. I'd spotted it on a cliff face deep in the back mountains during a previous herb-gathering trip. I'd noted it as something rare, but hadn't realized it was the very thing the magistrate was hunting for. A plan began forming in my mind. Advisor Chun was the magistrate's right hand? Fine. I'd go straight over his head and connect with the magistrate directly. Win the top man's favor with an enormous gift, and Chun would become irrelevant. I sent Goshing back to the county with a shopping list, a purple clay incense burner, several rare supplementary herbs, and tools for making fragrant compounds. When Old Qian at Renatang saw the list, he figured out what I was up to almost immediately. A burner and fragrance supplies? I must have found the legendary herb. His eyes lit up. This wasn't trouble. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. He prepared everything with the finest quality and sent a message back with Goshing. He'd personally arranged for my gift to reach the magistrate's private study. All I had to do was deliver the goods. The next morning, Goshing and I headed deep into the back mountains. We crossed 2 ridges and reached a hidden gorge with a bottomless dark pool at the bottom, mist rising from the freezing water. On the cliff face opposite, I saw it, the 7 Stars Moon Grass, swaying in the breeze. Bright green, 7 leaves fanned out around a tiny silver-white flower that seemed to glow even in daylight. The cliff was 100 feet of smooth, polished rock. No handholds, no ledges. Goshing's face went white just looking at it. I stripped off my outer clothes, took a breath, and launched myself at the wall. My feet found tiny points of contact on the stone surface, each tap pushing me several meters higher. I heard Goshing's jaw hit the ground behind me. In moments I reached the plant, carefully dug it out with roots and soil intact using a small shovel, wrapped it in clean white cloth, and tucked it inside my shirt. Then I dropped back down the cliff face, landing softly right in front of Goshing's frozen, open-mouthed face. Back home, I locked myself in my room and went to work. This was the critical part. I separated the leaves from the flower and ground them into bright green juice using a jade pestle, no metal tools, which would destroy the medicinal properties. Then I ground the supplementary herbs into powder at exact ratios from my 100 herbs mastery knowledge and blended everything together. As I stirred, a remarkable fragrance filled the room. It started cool and clean, like moonlight, then shifted to something warm that seemed to seep into your bones and sharpen your mind. I packed the finished compound into the purple clay incense burner and sealed it with special beeswax, leaving only a tiny pinhole for the scent to escape slowly. One filling would burn for half a month, releasing that extraordinary fragrance continuously. The next day, Goshing carried the sealed burner in a fine wooden box to Renetang. Old Qian's hands were shaking when he opened it. He didn't ask questions. He told Goshing to let me know I'd have an answer within 3 days. Old Qian handled it personally. He dressed in his finest clothes, went to the magistrate's residence, found the household steward, a man he'd cultivated a relationship with over years of business, and handed over a fat red envelope along with the wooden box. He described it as a rare incense with calming, restorative properties, a humble gift for the hard-working magistrate. The steward weighed the envelope, smiled, and accepted the box. He'd pass it along. Whether the magistrate used it was up to him. Old Qian's part was done. Now everything depended on whether that incense was as extraordinary as I'd made it. While I waited at home, the pieces were moving exactly as I'd planned. I later learned what happened on the other end. At the county magistrate's residence, Zhou Wenhai was sitting in his study, looking older than his 40-some years, white creeping into his temples, a constant tiredness in his face. He'd taken cold poison in his body years ago while serving at the border, and it had never healed. Every rainy day or stressful night, his chest burned like needles were stabbing him from inside. He'd seen every doctor, swallowed every medicine, and nothing worked. That was why he'd become obsessed with Taoist health practices and rare herbs. He was a man running out of options. When his servant brought in the wooden box from Old Qian, the magistrate barely glanced at it. He'd received dozens of so-called miracle gifts over the years, and they were always garbage. But then he leaned in and caught the scent drifting from the tiny pinhole in the sealed burner. Everything changed. The fragrance was unlike anything he'd encountered, not the heavy sweetness of sandalwood or the thick smoke of agarwood. It was clean and cool at first, like moonlight made into air, then gradually warm, seeping into his lungs, his chest, his limbs. The stabbing pain that had been gnawing at him all day began to fade. His knotted nerves loosened. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He ordered the burner lit immediately and placed on his desk. As the warmth intensified the fragrance, it filled the entire study. He closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and breathed deeply. The pain retreated further. His body relaxed in a way it hadn't in longer than he could remember. He wanted to know where this came from. Right now, Old Qian was summoned to the magistrate's study. The old pharmacist walked in terrified. If the incense had failed or caused harm, he'd be finished. But one look at the magistrate's face told him everything. The man's color was better, his eyes sharper, his voice warmer than Qian had ever heard it. The magistrate asked directly where the incense came from. Old Qian had his story ready. He said it wasn't his creation. It was made by a friend of his, a reclusive mountain eccentric who'd discovered an ancient formula in a deep cave and prepared it by hand. The man was brilliant but odd, didn't like dealing with officials, and might be frightened off by a direct approach. Old Qian was doing exactly what I'd hoped, building my image as some kind of mysterious hermit sage. The harder to reach I seemed, the more the magistrate would want to meet me. Zhou Wenhai wasn't deterred. He told Old Qian to simply provide the name and location, and he'd find a way to arrange a meeting himself. Then he added something that made Old Qian's heart nearly burst. As a reward for bringing the incense, the magistrate promised his personal protection for Renetang. Any trouble in the county, Old Qian could come straight to him. That was an enormous favor, the kind money couldn't buy. Old Qian gave him my name and the location of our village without hesitation. Sunyi, Sun Family Village. The magistrate repeated it quietly to himself, and Old Qian could see the fascination already burning in his eyes. My hook was set. Now I just had to wait for the fish to bite. Everything played out exactly as I planned. Old Qian was practically shaking when he left the magistrate's residence. He sent his fastest worker on horseback to bring me the news. But before that messenger even arrived, things were already happening inside the county office that would change everything. Advisor Chun had walked into the magistrate's study that same day. carrying a freshly prepared arrest warrant with my name on it. He expected the usual, a quick approval, a wave of the hand, and soldiers heading to our village by nightfall. He noticed something different, though. The magistrate looked better than usual, less tired, less irritable, and there was a strange, elegant fragrance filling the room that he'd never smelled before. Chen brought up my case. He called me a dangerous criminal who'd assaulted government personnel and urged immediate arrest to protect official authority. The magistrate put down his pen. He looked up, and instead of approving the warrant, he asked a question that made Chen's blood run cold. Was it true that Zhang San had been charging villagers double the legal tax rate, pocketing the difference? Sweat broke out on Chen's forehead. How did the magistrate know the details? He'd never cared about minor rural tax collection before. Chen stammered out a denial, insisting Zhang San would never dare such a thing and that I'd obviously made up lies to escape punishment. The magistrate smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said he was tired. The arrest could wait. Then, almost casually, he asked where Zhang San was. When Chen said he was home recovering, the magistrate delivered the real blow. Go visit Zhang San, wish him well, and inform him that his services as a tax collector were no longer needed. Chen stood frozen. Not only was the magistrate refusing to arrest me, he was firing Chen's own brother-in-law. This was a slap across Chen's face in the most elegant, devastating way possible. Chen tried to argue. The magistrate's eyes went cold. He asked point-blank whether Zhang San had been collecting extra money on Chen's behalf. Chen dropped to his knees, trembling, swearing his loyalty. The magistrate told him to get up, keep his people in line, and stop letting them damage the magistrate's reputation. Then he dismissed him. Chen stumbled out of the study drenched in cold sweat, unable to understand what had just happened. He didn't know about the incense. He didn't know about me. He had no idea that the ground had already shifted beneath his feet. Meanwhile, the magistrate sat alone in his fragrant study, feeling better than he had in years. The chest pain from the old cold poison he'd carried since his border service days was noticeably less. His mind was clearer. His body felt lighter. He was becoming increasingly curious about the young man who could produce such a thing. He called his steward and ordered a generous gift prepared, along with 2 sharp servants to deliver it. The message: the magistrate was unwell and would be honored if Master Sun Yi would visit his residence for a conversation. The hook had landed. The fish was on the line. Old Qian's messenger arrived at our gate, bursting with excitement. He told me the magistrate had loved the incense, had rewarded old Qian with his personal protection, and was now actively seeking me out. My entire family stood in the yard listening, stunned. My father's hands were shaking. His son had actually won over the county magistrate. I nodded, tipped the messenger with a piece of silver, and sent him on his way. Then I remembered, in all the chaos with the tax collectors and the magistrate's scheme, I'd nearly forgotten about my father's situation. I asked Goshing if he'd made any progress finding a companion for my old man.